Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into a Victorian London few dare to imagine the narrow, smoke-blackened chimneys that define the world of a Victorian child chimney sweep. If you think you could handle the hush of soot-clogged corridors, the weight of black dust pressing on every breath, and the silent danger lurking above, think again. By the end of our journey, you'll understand exactly why you wouldn't survive as a child, scaling those flues hour after hour. We'll begin before dawn, when the city's breath still hangs heavy in the cold air, and Alfie Finch, a boy of 7 years old, rises on a straw mattress to the rasp of soot in his lungs. You'll feel the sting of coarse wool against skin damp with terror, hear the distant clang of factory whistles, and taste the acrid tang of chimney smoke that never quite leaves the tongue. This isn't a fairy tale of gaslit streets or bustling markets. It's the raw, relentless struggle for every crumb, every stolen moment of warmth, and every inch of upward progress through a tunnel of brick and tar. So if you're curious or a little braver than most, hit like and subscribe, but only if you're ready for a slow, immersive history that soothes even as it unsettles. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, and what the hour is in your corner of the world. I love sharing these moonlit moments with you. Now, settle in. Let the quiet hum of your surroundings become part of the tale. Take a deep breath, and imagine the scent of damp stone and burnt coal, the soft scrape of a willow brush against masonry, and the hush of children's prayers whispered in shadowed alcoves. Beneath the soot-streaked routine lies the raw reality of quiet defiance, where each stolen crumb or whispered warning balanced hope and terror, and one misstep, one hushed murmur, could mean the end of your climb. Dim your lights, exhale your day's worries, and join me as we uncover why one day, as a Victorian London child chimney sweep, would be your last. Before the first pale fingers of dawn stretch across the sky, Alfie Finch lies wrapped, if one could call it that, in a ragged blanket that feels more like coarse burlap than cloth. The lumpy straw mattress beneath him is little more than a thin layer of chaff pressed against cold flagstones. And on these stones, the chill does not politely wait for sunrise. Instead, it seeps up through the cracks in the mortar, nudging Alfie's body awake with a persistent reminder that warmth is reserved for those with coin. As he blinks, each breath leaves a wisp of grey in the air, like tiny ghosts of flame that never quite ignite. His cold dark eyes adjust to a half-light that filters through a single grimy window pane, streaked with years of soot and the occasional finger-smudged pattern, as though invisible hands have reached out in dreams. The once white walls around him are now a muted canvas of blackened handprints and curled damp patches, telling a story of generations of sweeps who have risen here before him. With deliberate care, lest he wake any of the dozen other children pressed shoulder to shoulder in this attic, Alfie slides 1 foot from beneath the blanket. The stone floor greets him with an icy shock that tickles his nerves. Prompting a soft gasp, he swallows into the hush. His toes curl against the chill, seeking any reprieve from the grey cold. The blanket, threadbare and drawn thin by countless washings, offers less comfort than the bare mattress, but Alfie has learned not to fuss. He folds it back with mechanical precision and swings his legs over the mattress edge, each movement slow so as not to disturb the delicate ecosystem of snores and whispered breaths around him. His trousers, patched roughly at the knees and ankles, hang loose on his slight frame. He shimmies into them, tugging at the coarse burlap patches that rub against his skin like tiny persistent thorns. The trousers are held up by a fraying cord, tied in a knot that has seen better days, but a loose garment beats cold air any morning. Next comes the shirt, a simple piece of linen with sleeves too long, cuffs frayed, and the neck stretched almost to breaking. He pulls it over his head in one smooth motion, shaking out creases that settled in the night, and the fabric clings damply to his back. He imagines he can feel each droplet of yesterday's soot-laden sweat still trapped in the weave. Even in this muted light, he notices the gentle rise and fall of his small chest, the way his ribs press against damp cloth. He inhales again, tasting a medley of scents, so distinct they could be ingredients in a perverse alchemist's potion. The sour tang of stale ale wafting up from the tavern, 2 floors below, the acrid smoke drifting in from the river barges that chug along the Thames, and if he concentrates, the sharp earthy note of flue tar that lurks at the edges of every breath. Today these aromas will mingle with the finer flavours of fear and anticipation, as Alfie prepares to greet his master's whip or praise, whichever comes first. He pauses by the window, pressing a fingertip to the cool glass, and surveys the city's silhouette before it fully wakes. Chimney stacks rise like a forest of blackened fingers against the dim sky, and he knows that in just minutes, those silent towers will become his world. The tall brick stacks may seem unsympathetic, but to Alfie, they are both adversary and home, carved in shadow and soot. In this moment, cocooned between the promise of light and the certainty of smoke, Alfie allows himself a small, wry smile, an almost imperceptible curve of the lips that speaks of a child's stubborn whimsy. Even here, on the edge of morning's chill, he finds a spark of something warm, the unspoken joke that only he understands. After all, who else would greet a day by naming the exact hue of soot on their fingertips? And so, with deliberate calm, he tucks that fleeting amusement into his heart and laces up his boots, mismatched and half-soled, ready to begin the ascent. Each movement is unhurried, measured, a ritual. For in these garrets of the East End, where warmth is scarce and hope scarcer still, routine is freedom's closest friend. The sudden rap at the door cracks the stillness like a dropped brick. Alfie's body jolts, and for a heartbeat, he fears the world has caved in. He's learned to recognize that sound, sharp, impatient, and heavy with promise of pain. With a single breath, he steadies his chest, smooths back the wild tangles of soot-matted hair, and forces his knees beneath him in a disciplined kneel. Beyond the flimsy timber, the corridor light flickers, revealing Master Cole's silhouette, a broad-shouldered figure, hunched slightly against the low lintel. In one hand, he clutches a lantern whose glass panes dance with tremulous flames. In the other, a coiled whip, its rawhide lash glinting like a viper poised to strike. His presence fills the threshold, as though the entire house leans in to witness Alfie's ritual. Master Cole steps forward. His boots, scarred leather patched in at least 3 places, land on broken floorboards with a hollow echo that vibrates through Alfie's limbs. Each footfall is a metronome of dread, marking seconds until judgment. When the lantern's glow settles on Alfie's form, he lowers his head, careful not to meet those hawkish eyes until bidden. With a slow, measured gesture, Alfie extends his trembling hands. First comes the willow brush, stout, its iron-bound bristles still holding stray shards of yesterday's ascent. Then the knotted hemp rope, each weighted hem a promise that debris will fall away and not his body. He lays them on the warped boards, the brush's handle level with his fingertips, the rope coiled in a patient spiral beside it. Master Cole leans in, the light revealing the map of soot etched into Alfie's cheeks and the tremor in his thin arms. The overseer's gaze flicks from brush to rope, pausing over the black iron weights, small but heavy enough to tug on a child's wrists. Alfie's heart hammers so loudly that he's certain the whip's tip will taste it, each beat a reprimand for any hesitation. Yet, in that hush before approval or condemnation, Alfie's eyes catch a detail. The lantern's glass is smeared with grease, and the flame inside flutters like a moth trapped behind glass. Even the fiercest guardians of order fail to maintain perfection. He allows himself a breath so quiet it's mistaken for part of the building's creak. "Good," Master Cole rumbles, voice low and textured with years of inhaled coal and authority. It's the word Alfie has waited for, though its warmth is as thin as the lantern's flame. He tucks the tools beneath his arm, mindful not to jostle the weights, and rises to his feet. The narrow attic feels smaller now, walls inching inward, as though they too judge his readiness. As Alfie stands, Master Cole closes the door with a soft click that carries finality. The chamber's dimness returns, but the echo of that click lingers, as sharp as the whip's crack. Alfie's fingers curl around the brush handle, tracing its ridges. He tests the rope's heft with a small twist. These tools are extensions of himself, partners in a dance of survival that begins anew each morning. He takes one last glance at his fellow sleepers. Faces blurred in shadows, chests rising and falling in uncertain rhythm, and allows a faint rueful smile to ghost across his lips. If one could call this life kind, this moment carries its own dark humour. The boy who dreams of sweet porridge must first stand ready to face the overseer's glare. With the lantern's glow gone, and the door sealed, Alfie steps toward the hatch. Each movement is deliberate, unhurried, as though speed might invite collapse. He lifts the trapdoor, the hinges creaking in reluctant protest, and pauses to inhale. The scent of tar and soot drifts upward, mingled with the slightest whiff of morning dew from the roof above. He ducks through and lands with a muted thud on the roof slates. Before him, the forest of chimneys stretches into the grey sky, each a dark promise. The day has truly begun, and with Master Cole's knock behind him, Alfie knows the ascent awaits, and so does his fate. The rim of the chimney pot yawns before him, soot black and cool to the touch, like the mouth of some great mouldering beast. Alfie bristles at the slight chill across his fingertips as he pushes the pot aside, the metal protesting with a faint, hollow groan. Below, the shaft narrows into a tunnel of shadow so dense it might as well be another world. He hesitates at the threshold, chest tight, and lets out a slow breath that clouds in the damp air. One hand presses against the rough brick, each lump of mortar protruding like a callus under his palm. The other reaches for the willow brush and hemp rope coiled at his hip, tools that feel more like extensions of his arms than burdens he wears. He guides the brush into the opening and shoves, listening to the echo of his own heartbeat reverberate back at him. Even the smallest sounds are amplified in this hollow corridor, the faint hiss of shifting soot, the rattle of distant cartwheels above, and somewhere in the vast silence, the soft sigh of London's waking breath. Alfie lowers himself, shoulders first, until the brick walls converge around his ribs. He imagines he feels the weight of the city's smoke settling on his spine. For a moment the world outside retreats, and he exists only within these narrow confines, where every movement demands both caution and resolve. A trickle of soot drips down the back of his neck, stinging like tiny embers against his damp hair. He doesn't flinch. He learned long ago that a wince could twist a foothold loose or dislodge a wisp of tar that might blind him in the dark. His boots find the first ledge, a thin wafer of brick protruding just enough to bear his weight. The leather sole presses into the grit, and he feels the tiny rocks shift underfoot, a reminder that nothing is entirely secure. With deliberate slowness he tests each grip. One hand clutches a worn joint in the masonry, the other manipulates the weighted rope, coaxing it downward to clear the debris from below. Each tug produces a rattle of flakes tumbling into distant silence, evidence of yesterday's climb now falling away. As he begins to ascend, his muscles protest in low murmurs, quivering fibers unused to so much strain, so early in the morning. His lungs tighten as they draw air through soot-stained lips, each inhale tasting faintly of burnt coal and last night's damp embers. He breathes shallowly at first, wary of pulling too much black dust into his throat, but the shaft offers no mercy for hesitance. He must inhale enough air to keep moving, or risk the creeping numbness that hints at suffocation. Well above him, a sliver of pale light beckons, a destination more tantalizing than any prize. Inch by inch, Alfie edges upward, every movement a cautious negotiation between body and brick. The narrower the tunnel becomes, the more intimate the contact, his shoulders brushing both walls, his spine aligned with centuries of soot. In this muted space, the world's bustle is nothing more than a distant heartbeat, and time seems to stretch into an eternity measured only by the rhythm of his climb. He imagines for an instant the outside world, sunlight, dancing on the Thames, the warm aroma of fresh bread wafting from a bakery window, the laughter of other children free to roam the cobbled streets. But these thoughts are distractions, delightful and dangerous. He exhales, letting them dissolve in the blackness, and refocuses on the next handhold, the next foothold. A loose brick jostles under his palm, and for one breathless second, gravity seems to beckon him downward. His heart thrums in his ears like a warning bell, but his fingers close around firmer mortar just in time. He allows himself a flicker of wry humour. After all, who else can claim to practice rooftop tightrope walking before breakfast? And pushes onward, suppressing any sigh that might jostle his grip. Finally, as the daylight grows stronger, the shaft widens. Alfie reaches the smoke shelf, a ledge carved to catch residue, now serving as his welcome mat. He hoists himself onto it and pauses, chest heaving, arms slick with soot and sweat. Above him, the city's early chorus resumes, carriage wheels clattering, distant church bells tolling, and the gentle roar of human endeavour. He tilts his head back, letting the cool dawn air fill his lungs as he pushes himself up into the rooftop haze. The ascent is over for now, yet in that hush between flue and firm ground, Alfie knows the day's true climb has only begun. Alfie's world begins and ends with three implements: the willow brush, the coiled ropes, and the iron scraper. Together, these humble instruments compose his day's rhythm, his means of survival, and the ever-present reminder that every climb can be both livelihood and grave. The willow brush feels almost alive in Alfie's small hands. Its handle, once smooth oak, has been worn hollow by thousands of fingers, each groove a subtle testament to past ascents. Bound at its head are bristles of stiff willow twigs, each strand encased in a snug band of iron wire. The bristles fan out like a corset, rigid yet flexible enough to mold to the flue's narrowing curves. Alfie taps the brush's side against a timber sill once or twice, loosening the heaviest tar flakes before committing to the full sweep. As the brush moves, its bristles scrape along brickwork, releasing centuries of soot in a whisper rather than a roar. The sound is oddly comforting, a quiet percussion that counts the passage of time better than any clock. In the half-light of dawn he learns to listen. A hollow thunk means loose debris. A muted rasp suggests stubborn build-up. Each sound guides his hands in a slow choreography, one that balances pressure with patience, urgency with care. Coiled beside the brush, the hemp ropes look innocuous. Simple strands of twisted fibre, but to Alfie they are lifelines. Each rope is weighted at its end with black iron lumps, the pendants of ballast that tug the dislodged soot downwards and out of sight. Alfie knows that rope making is an art he does not possess. He inherited these coils, neatly rewound each evening from sweeps who climbed long before him. The hemp smell is earthy and faintly sweet, contrasting with the bitter tang of coal dust. Before each climb, Alfie tests the knots, running rough scrubbed fingers along each loop. A loose hitch could betray him, sending him tumbling into dark oblivion. A well-tied knot secures his ascent and descent, a silent promise of safety. He wriggles the rope between his palms, feeling its texture coarse yet supple, and imagines the countless climbs it has endured. There is comfort in its familiarity, a reminder that he is not alone beneath those brick walls. Then there is the scraper, a hooked blade of steel, dulled by months of relentless use. The blade's edge once gleamed in the craftsman's forge. Now it bears the subdued sheen of soot and scratch marks like faint scars. Alfie's apprentice hands learned early that the scraper is a precision tool, used sparingly when the brush cannot free a stubborn patch of tar. One wrong angle, one excessive force, and the scraper could gouge both flue and flesh. He holds it gingerly, as one might cradle a sleeping bird, guiding its curve into tight corners and rough ledges. The metal drags across brick with a low, metallic groan, and Alfie leans in to observe the dance of shadows that play across the corroded surface. Each scrape releases an ember of memory, perhaps a particularly challenging climb high above a roaring hearth, or a day when he nearly tipped backward, the scraper his only support until he pushed himself free. Alfie arranges the trio with deliberate reverence, the brush across his shoulder, the rope looped over his forearm, the scraper sheathed at his waist. Together, they feel heavier than his own body, yet he carries them as naturally as breath. He imagines they whisper secrets to one another, the brush telling of tight bends and slick bricks, the rope murmuring of tumbling soot and the weight of gravity, the scraper rattling tales of stubborn tar and narrow escapes. In moments of weariness, he's heard himself chatter aloud, half a joke, half a prayer, urging each tool to behave, promising to mend every fray or dull edge in exchange for another safe descent. There's a subtle humour in the intimacy between boy and tools. Alfie sometimes pantomimes a curt bow before setting out, as if addressing them as noble partners in a grand endeavour. And when the brush flicks a loose clump of soot back at his face, he allows himself a quiet chuckle, a private acknowledgement that, for all their utility, these instruments are not infallible. In the soft glow of morning's first light, Alfie lifts the brush, feels its weight, and breathes deep. The taste of tar-laced air fills his lungs, and he steadies himself for the day's work. Tools in hand, he is neither master nor master's possession. He is a small, determined shape against centuries-old brick, ready to dance a slow waltz of survival, guided by the brush, tethered by the rope, and tempered by the scraper's edge. Alfie's coat hangs heavy on his slight frame, a reluctant armour stitched together from necessity rather than design. What began life as olive wool, likely a surplus army greatcoat, has long since surrendered its colour to layers of soot and tar. Now it is a patchwork canvas. Coarse burlap squares sprawled across elbows and shoulders, seams crudely zigzagged with thick twine, and the occasional scrap of faded cotton bartered from a rag-and-bone man. Each patch tells its own story. A tear mended after a near-fatal tumble in a narrow shaft, another sewn over to cover a burn spot where he rested too close to a glowing flue. In the dawnlight, the burlap patches glow a muted ochre, as though each were a tiny ember resisting the coat's overall charcoal gloom. Beneath the coat, Alfie wears a linen shirt so starched and stiff it creaks with every movement. He often jokes quietly to himself that it might be easier to climb the chimney than to wrestle that shirt on and off. The fabric, once breathable, now feels like board against his skin, its fibers crusted with the fine dust of 100 climbs. At the neck, the collar is frayed down to half its original width, rumpled from repeated tugging in the half-darkness. When he leans forward to descend a flue, the collar rubs against his jaw, leaving a ghost of itch, long after he's escaped the chimney's embrace. His trousers are equally forlorn. The waist sits just above his hip bones, tightened with a looping hemp cord that shifts unsteadily with each bend and stretch. Alfie cradles a secret amusement in those momentary victories when he can ease the cord a notch before the master's inspection, only to have it cinch back at the most inopportune moments. Like midway through a narrow section of flue, the legs of the trousers, once generously cut, now hug his calves in patches where extra fabric was removed to prevent snagging. Here and there, knee patches constructed of coarser burlap serve both as reinforcement and as a discreet reminder of the many times he crawled across rough brick surfaces. Soot is the unseen thread woven through every garment. It seeps into the very heart of the fabric, clings to fibers like an unwelcome guest, and refuses to be shaken free. Alfie learned early to accept that no amount of brushing or airing out would restore his coat or trousers to anything resembling clean. The soot spreads beyond the garments too, smudging his cheeks, staining his hairline, and settling into the hollows of his collarbone. Each dawn as he dresses, he imagines he can feel the history in the grime, echoes of every climb he's made, every flake of coal dust he's released. His boots, mismatched and half-laced, complete the ensemble. One is a battered leather affair with missing eyelets, the other a stiffer, higher-ankled boot that once belonged to his older brother, and now gapes where the tongue splayed open. Each step produces a soft crunch as the soles, caked with grit and broken brick fragments, grind against the insole. Inside, his toes press against ragged nails and cold footbeds, a daily reminder of afternoons spent pressed against hard stone. The weight of each boot, one heavier than the other, encourages a subtle limp, which Alfie tolerates rather than admit it might slow his climb. These clothes are both shield and cage. They protect him from the worst of the flue's heat, where unpatched wool would singe and torn linen ignite. But they also trap grime and sweat against his skin, magnifying the itch of dust and the sting of tar. When Alfie pauses on a rooftop to catch his breath, he feels the fabric cling to his back as though it fears letting go, and in those moments he senses the garments are as much a part of him as his own bones. Yet, there is a certain comfort in this shared confinement. The weight of patched wool and stiff linen ties him to a lineage of chimney sweeps, each garment a silent pact that he belongs to something larger than himself. A brotherhood of those who dwell between brick walls and rising smoke. With a gentle exhale, he smooths the coat's lapel, settles the shirt's collar, and tugs at the hemp cord. In the armour of grime, Alfie stands ready to face another day where protection and imprisonment are woven into every stitch. Alfie thinks of London's chimneys as living corridors, unyielding stone passageways that breathe smoke by day and bide their time by night. To an onlooker, a chimney stack may appear uniform, but inside every flue is a unique maze of narrowing walls, treacherous ledges, and hidden traps. He begins each climb by studying the pot opening, noting how today's shaft might differ from yesterday's. Some flues welcome him with generous girth, walls set wide enough to cradle his chest, while others squeeze him through hand and knee crawls, so cramped that each breath feels borrowed. He often imagines himself as a sliver of coal dust drifting upward, but the bricks below have other plans. The first challenge is the smoke shelf, a ledge cut into the flue where heavier soot is meant to settle before it can descend into the hearth. In theory, it's a gentle pause, but in practice it's like a low ceiling slick with baked tar. Alfie braces one shoulder against the damp brick and tests each foothold as if tiptoeing across a glass floor. A misjudged step here means sliding backward into darkness, or worse, crashing through a brittle soot bridge into a hidden cavity. Around each corner, flue bends force him to adjust his grip, ducking so low his ears brush the stone. At these bends, bricks are worn unevenly. Some jut outward, like the spines of an old creature. Others inset into hollows that swallow his brush, or scrape his knuckles. One misplaced twist of the brush handle can snag on a jagged edge, yanking his hand forward, and sending his whole body lurching. Alfie has learned to feel for these bends by leaning his cheek against the wall, and following the heat gradient. Where the stone warms faster, the fire below has chewed deeper into the brickwork. Hidden hollows in mortar joints pose another threat. Alfie's keen eyes, accustomed to watching for glimmers of stray light, can spot a shallow pit where a loose brick once stood. He presses his palm flat against the mortar, sensing even the slightest give, like tapping a buried treasure chest. But some hollows are deep, voids carved by time or violence, ready to swallow a foot or dash a knee against an unseen ledge. He moves slowly here, each inch gained measured against the potential for a sudden drop into void. For all this danger, there is a quiet beauty to the flue's design. Each shaft is built to draw smoke efficiently, tapering ever so slightly, angling to maintain the draft that fuels London's glowing hearths. Alfie admires the craft in those straight stretches, where bricklayers align in flawless patterns, their uniform edges whispering of skilled masons long gone. In these moments, he allows his mind to rest on the idea that even the harshest corridors were born of human intention. The interplay of light and shadow is another subtle guide. In wider sections, pale dawn light filters down, illuminating floating motes of soot, like drifting snowflakes. Alfie breathes in the faint glow, tracking the motes as they rise and settle, mapping the flue's shape through their dances. Where darkness swallows the spark, he tightens his grip and advances by memory, recalling the patterns of brick and mortar from his last climb. Some flues bear scars of past disasters, burn marks where a hidden ember ignited a pocket of tar, or charred patches where a sweep became trapped long enough for smoke to carve new crevices. Alfie's brush reveals these scars gradually, revealing a history of suffering etched into the chimney's flesh. He pauses often in these spots, resting against the cool stone, letting the silence remind him that each climb is part of a lineage. Through it all, there is the distant rumble of London's life beyond these walls. A muted pulse of carriage wheels, vendors' cries carried through alleyways, and the soft toll of church bells. The flue, for all its perils, is also a sanctuary from that clamour, a slow surrender to solitude where rhythm is measured by brush strokes and heartbeats. When Alfie finally emerges onto the rooftop, soot coating his hands and face, he looks back at the chimney's mouth as though bidding farewell to a stern teacher. He knows it will swallow him again tomorrow, yet for now he savours the fresh air on his skin, the taste of freedom after a journey through stone and shadow. Each climb ends, until tomorrow, when the chimney beckons once more. He can still feel the rough hemp cord knot pressing into his wrist as he was led into the workhouse hall that morning. A cord meant for pigs or sacks, not the wrists of a 6-year-old. Dawn's first grey light filtered through tall, narrow windows, painting long, thin rectangles across the worn flagstone floor. The air inside was heavy with the tang of boiled cabbage and sour porridge, mingling with the sharper bite of vinegar and old leather from countless apprentices before him. Alfie's stomach tightened at the scent, even as his mind clung to the one comforting thought, 14 shillings toward his mother's rent. The hall's walls rose high on cold brick, interrupted only by soot-streaked beams that sagged under unfamiliar burdens. A single oil lamp, perched on a chipped oak table, trembled in its cradle, casting erratic shadows that danced across the faces gathered there. Apprentices in ragged coats sat on backless benches, heads bowed like birds roosting at dawn, while overseers in threadbare frock coats hovered at the edges, quizzical and unsmiling. Alfie shuffled forward, knees knocking softly against his patched trousers, and found himself before Master Cole's steward, a lean man whose spectacles glinted in the lamplight and whose quill seemed as curved and merciless as a raven's claw. The steward cleared his throat, a sound like gravel shifting, and set down a sheaf of parchment. Alfie's heart fluttered like a trapped sparrow as he gazed at the paper's crisp whiteness, a stark promise that his life was no longer his to steer. The lines of ink on the page described terms in a language heavy with legal weight: indenture, obligation, term of service. Alfie had learned some words in the school's cramped corner, but these felt foreign, twisted by power into instruments of confinement. With a trembling hand he picked up the quill. Its feather, once snowy white, was now stained a deep sepia, and the ink pooled at its tip like a droplet of night. He dipped it into a small inkwell, the glass cold against his palm, and watched as the quill drank. Then, under the steward's watchful gaze, Alfie pressed it to the parchment. His O emerged as a wobbly circle, half-formed, like his understanding of what this moment meant. He tried to steady his hand, but the quill scratched and skittered, leaving tiny ragged slivers of ink across the page. Each scratch felt like a nail on the coffin of his childhood. When he finished, the steward inspected the mark as though judging a farmer's crop yield. Satisfied or perhaps unmoved, he tucked the quill under his elbow and spoke in measured tones. "You will report to Master Cole at first light each morning. Your term lasts until age 21, or until the sum of 14 shillings, with interest, is deemed repaid." Alfie nodded, though he barely understood how a sum owed could stretch over 15 years and still be called relief. Once the steward affixed his own signature, an elaborate flourish that echoed with authority, the parchment was folded and sealed with a dab of wax. Alfie watched the seal set, a tiny scarlet bead marking the moment his fate was distilled into legal code. In that hush that followed, children shifted on benches, their stifled sighs filling the space like a low wind. One boy coughed, a brittle, rattling sound, reminding Alfie that illness and indenture often went hand in hand. He forced himself to swallow, tasting a hint of ink and vinegar still clinging to his tongue. The steward dismissed him with a curt nod, and Alfie rose, careful not to disturb the lamp's flicker. He tucked the parchment into the inside pocket of his patchwork coat, the seals and signatures pressing coldly against his ribs. The hall's shadows seemed to lean in closer as he passed, and Alfie thought he heard them whisper, "Child, you belong to us now." Out in the chill morning air he exhaled, his lungs filled with the scent of smoke from nearby chimneys and the distant murmur of the Thames. For a moment he closed his eyes and let the cold wind clear his thoughts. He was still Alfie Finch, small, scrappy, determined, but with every breath he carried the knowledge that childhood had been auctioned for rent relief, and that every climb, every scrape of soot, would check against the ledger of his indenture. And yet, as he glanced back at the looming workhouse facade, he felt a spark of something unspent. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps irony. He traced the quill's scratch mark in his mind and allowed himself the faintest wry smile. After all, if life insists on becoming a contract, then one might as well learn to read the fine print. The morning light filters through tall, narrow windows into the workhouse gallery, painting solemn stripes across the dust motes dancing in the air. Below, rows of gaunt orphans sit on backless benches, their shoulders stooped as if carrying the weight of every brick they will ever scrub. Each child's eyes flicker with a mixture of dread and resignation, anticipating the moment when names will be called and destinies decided by coin and callous indifference. At the room's center stands a simple wooden stool, its surface worn smooth by years of small feet. This stool is the stage upon which childhood is auctioned away. Alfie Finch watches it, tracing its scuffs with a quiet fascination, as though studying a curious artifact rather than the harbinger of another boy's servitude. He shifts ever so slightly, just enough to ease the sting in his thighs, reminding himself that staying still is its own kind of strength. A hush falls as Master Cole steps forward, his boots clicking on the flagstones like a metronome, measuring out patience. Behind him, rival masters and overseers lean in, their eyes glinting with calculating interest. They carry little more than leather gloves and clipped notebooks, but in this moment they hold unspoken power, the power to transform a child into property. Alfie notes the architecture of authority in their posture, the lean forward of predatory birds, the flick of the eye to assess weight and height. When Master Cole clears his throat, the first child is summoned, a boy no older than 7, with hollow cheeks and a shock of matted hair, steps onto the wooden stool. He stands clutching the edge, shoulders trembling, as Cole and the others inspect him. Alfie watches their practiced movements, fingers running along arms, palms tapping rib cages, a light squeeze of calves to test strength. It's clinical, efficient, a butcher sizing up cuts of meat, if meat could blink back. A rival master raises a hand, and murmured bids begin. 6pence, 8, a shilling. The numbers rise, each coin an invisible chain tightening around the boy's future. Alfie imagines the clink of each penny, as though he's hearing it in reverse, the sound of freedom slipping away. When the highest bid is struck, a curt nod from the purchaser, and the boy's name is called. He steps down, his knees tremble, as he's guided toward the awaiting overseer, the light catching in tears he refuses to shed. Alfie feels for him, even as he knows tears are a luxury forbidden on this stage. Next comes another boy, then another, until the gallery's bench is empty inch by inch. Alfie, among the last, feels the shifting currents of the room draw nearer. He stows his hands in his patched coat pockets, letting the slight swell of heat from the hearth behind him remind him that warmth can still exist in this place. When Master Cole beckons him forward, Alfie rises with deliberate slowness, severing attention from his pounding pulse. He climbs onto the stool, and a hush deepens so completely that he can hear the whisper of his own breath. He feels the lantern's heat at his back, and the weight of dozens of eyes, each as unyielding as brick. A hand grips his elbow, steadying him, and Alfie squares his shoulders. Master Cole's inspecting fingers, cold and exact, trail along Alfie's ribs and arms, assessing muscle and sinew with detached efficiency. Alfie's eyes lock on the distant window strip of light, where the Thames glimmers like a promise he may never see again. Murmurs Cole, stepping back, consulting his small, scuffed notebook. Strong enough. 1 and 6. The bid cracks through the silence, brief yet thunderous in Alfie's ears. A single penny more, and Alfie's life tilts irrevocably towards soot and confiscated dreams. The room's collective breath seems to hold. Then another voice, a rival master's, raises the stakes. Alfie registers each syllable as though it's carved in echo. 2 pence. 2 and 3. Finally, the gavel-like voice of the highest bidder seals the bargain. 3 and 6. A nod, a whisper of gloves brushing against fabric, and Alfie's world contracts to the span between two men's palms. He steps down from the stool, legs unsteady, and is led away by the new master. Behind him, the other boys remain seated, counting the spaces between themselves where he once sat, awaiting their own call. At the barred windows, a few faces peer in. Parents, siblings, some pressing palms against the iron grills, but none can reach through. Their silent tears stain the glass. Alfie glances back once, offering a ghost of a smile, an act of grace amid cruelty. Before the gallery's door closes with a soft final click, the echo drifts through the room, a quiet testament to the auction day's horrors, lingering like a distant church bell toll at dusk. In the narrow, half-lit alley behind the tavern, where Alfie and his fellow sweep boys gathered at day's end, the air hung heavy with the scent of soot and damp cobblestones. Here, beyond the master's watchful gaze and the clatter of carriage wheels, Alfie first encountered Thomas Tug Murphy, a wiry boy of 9, with quick eyes and a grin that suggested mischief even in the gloomiest moments. Tug's first lesson came in silence. One evening, Alfie and a handful of others huddled around a sputtering oil lamp that cast tremulous shadows on grimy walls. Tug beckoned solemnly, then guided Alfie's hand along the rough brickwork of the alley's far side. "Feel here," Tug murmured, voice low and certain. Alfie pressed his palm flat against the stone, sensing the faint groove where a hidden ledge awaited. Tug's finger tapped the spot, and with deft precision, the two boys extracted a scrap of bread stolen from yesterday's bakery run. Small comforts stowed away from prying eyes and hungry overseers. Over the following weeks, Tug transformed the alley into a clandestine classroom. He taught Alfie how to twist loose bricks just so, creating miniature hideaways for thimble-sized tokens. A shard of smoked fish, a bit of stolen chalk for warm jokes scrawled on attic walls, even a worn glove left by some forgetful chimney sweep. Each treasure became a talisman against the day's harshness, a reminder that even in darkness, small lights could spark hope. Alfie learned to follow Tug's silent signals, a raised eyebrow, a tilt of the head, so they could share morsels and laughter without uttering a single word that might betray their rebellion. The camaraderie between the two boys was as natural as the soot that clung to their skin. Together they scaled chimneys on grim mornings, sharing friendly jabs when one struggled with a stubborn tar patch, or when the other emerged from the flue looking like a coal sprite rather than a child. They swapped stories of childhoods they barely remembered. Tug's siblings sold to a rag-and-bone man, Alfie's mother labouring in narrow dock warehouses, and found in each other a camaraderie rooted in shared hardship. In the hush of the alley, they promised loyalty. "We watch each other's backs," Tug said one night, tapping Alfie's shoulder with the flat of his hand. But loyalty in the world of the sweep could be as brittle as a single brick ledge. One damp morning, when the workhouse's doors creaked open before dawn, Alfie noticed Tug's expression shift just a flicker, a hesitation in the way his friend shouldered his bag of tools. Later, Alfie learned why. Master Cole, ever attuned to potential treachery, had offered Tug a silver groat, an entire day's meagre wage for a single name whispered in his ear. Tug's quick wit saw opportunity. That name would mark Alfie as a leader of small rebellions, the boy most likely to trade secrets for scraps. That afternoon, Tug cornered Alfie in their usual refuge, and dropped the news in a flat, rehearsed tone. Alfie's heart thudded, a sudden stone in his chest. He peered at Tug's face, eyes flicking between coin and confession, searching for the friend he thought he knew. When Tug finally spoke his betrayed word, it tumbled into the air like a loose brick, knocking away trust and leaving a hollow echo that neither boy could fill. In the days that followed, Alfie felt the shift. Tug avoided his glance, distance growing between them like mortar crumbling from aged flues. The alley, once a sanctuary of whispered schemes and shared crumbs, felt colder. Alfie realized that every hidden ledge and secret stowaway came with a price, and that betrayal could arrive as swiftly as a dislodged brick. Yet, even on his loneliest descent through a chimney's narrowing corridor, he held fast to the memory of Tug's earlier kindness, the gentle tap that revealed a hidden nook, the silent nod that shared both warmth and bread. Through that fracture, Alfie learned perhaps the most enduring lesson of all. In the world beneath London's soot-choked skies, trust must be earned anew each morning, with every careful step and every whispered promise. And though some allegiances would splinter like weak mortar, the knowledge of both loyalty and betrayal would guide him more surely than any hidden ledge ever could. Alfie threads his way through the narrow alley toward Master Cole's pantry at noon, chest rumbling with a hunger so persistent it feels as though his ribs are echoing in his ears. The pantry door hangs crooked on its hinges, its once bright paint dulled by years of soot and rain. Inside, a single flickering lamp casts a pool of muted yellow light over a chipped iron pot that rests on a low wooden shelf. The pot's surface is mottled with rust and ringed by layers of hardened oatmeal residue, testimony to countless breakfasts that offered little more than warmth. Alfie hesitates at the threshold, breathing in the steam that drifts upward like the last wisps of a dying campfire. The gruel's aroma is a hesitant invitation. Musty oats, boiled until they barely clung together, laced with the faint tang of ash from the hearth's embers. He allows himself a small, wry smile. After all, it's a rare moment when both heat and sustenance coexist in this world of flues and frost. But the smile fades as his stomach tugs insistently at his guts. He slips forward, careful to make no more than the softest creak on the worn floorboards. The other sweet boys mill around the pot in subdued clusters, each vying silently for a portion. Alfie reaches the edge of the circle, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no master's watchful eye intrudes. Satisfied that the overseers remain unaware, he slips his fingers into the pot, feeling the chill of yesterday's congealed gruel that clings to the iron. He scoops a small handful of the pale, watery mixture, icing his fingertips in a cold, wet blanket, and raises it to his lip. The first sliver of gruel is an abrupt shock. It slides across his tongue with the texture of thin glue, its temperature more akin to a puddle's last gasp of warmth under a grey sky. Alfie swallows, the gruel crawling down his throat in slow motion, tugging the emptiness in his belly into something more bearable. He tastes the heavy oat, the slight bitterness of overcooked starch, and a whisper of smoke that clings to each bit. The combination is neither unpleasant nor satisfying. It simply is. When his fingers emerge, smeared in congealed oatmeal, Alfie licks them clean with a deliberate slowness, savouring the ritual. The others watch with quiet envy, their eyes flicking from the pot to the thin line of gruel on his lips. Alfie offers them a conspiratorial grin, a private joke about the day's meagre bounty, then dips in again, this time lifting a spoonful with careful precision. The spoon, dented and blackened by flame, produces a thin clang as it meets the pot's rim. Each motion echoes in the pantry, a muted percussion that measures the boy's anticipation. Alfie raises the spoon to his mouth and allows the lukewarm gruel to pool on his tongue. He feels the grains separate, the water recede, and the oats swell slightly as they rehydrate. His jaw works in a steady, rhythmic chew that almost lulls him into a trance. Behind him, a sudden scuffle. Another boy's foot snagging on a loose floorboard jars Alfie from his reverie. He suppresses a cough, wiping a stray droplet from his chin. Even this small lapse threatens a reprimand at Master Cole's lodging. Waste is as unforgivable as theft. Alfie returns to his task with renewed focus, each spoonful counted and deliberate, as though measuring time itself. When the pot finally empties, Alfie allows a lingering pause. He surveys the pantry, the iron pot, now scraping softly against its base, the thin tendrils of steam curling toward the lamp, and the other boys, their bellies barely more distended than before. He closes his eyes for a moment, tasting the memory of warmth, knowing it may be hours before the next meal, and that the promise of bread at day's end is as uncertain as the turn of a brick in a chimney shaft. He sets the pot aside with care, mindful of the dented surface, and steps back into the cold light of midday. The pantry's door swings shut with a soft creak, sealing away the acrid scent of oatmeal and ash. Alfie breathes in the crisp air, its clarity a stark contrast to the gruel's muted offering. He straightens his patched coat, feeling the weight of his empty stomach settle like a stone, and prepares to face the afternoon's trials, the brush, the ropes, and the ever-present temptation to steal another taste of gruel from an ill-guarded pot. Alfie's stomach growls with a persistence only hunger can inspire. By mid-morning, the watery oatmeal in Master Cole's pantry has long settled into his gut, and Alfie realizes he must seek sustenance beyond the workhouse's meager offerings. Slipping away during the brief lull between assignments, he makes for the baker's alley, a narrow side street where dawn's first loaves line stoops like sentinels of warmth against the lingering chill. The alley is hushed, save for the gentle scrape of a baker's broom against cobblestones and the distant hiss of a cart's wheel. Flour drifts in pale clouds, settling on Alfie's coat shoulders like a light dusting of frost. He moves with caution, boots crunching softly over grit and stray grain husks. Each breath carries the comforting aroma of yeast and sugar, a perfume as exotic as any perfume sold in West End shops, and far more intoxicating to a boy who has tasted little else. At the alley's far end, a row of stoops shields the backs of the bakeries. Here discarded crusts and broken rolls gather in small drifts, hidden from casual view. Alfie crouches behind a wooden barrel of brine pickles, using it as cover. He watches as his butter-stained fingers, smudged black from chimney soot, produce a few tarnished pennies. Each coin bears the imprint of last week's wages, but he handles them like rare jewels nonetheless. He steps forward, heart ticking up a notch. The baker, broad-shouldered and flower-kneed, leans against his doorframe, whistling a shrill tune. Alfie presses a single coin into the man's rough palm, the metal cool and heavy with promise. The baker's eyes flick over Alfie's soot-streaked face and patched coat, then down to the trembling fingers clutching the coin. There is a flicker of recognition, perhaps a memory similar to Alfie's own desperate need, and the baker nods once, sharply. "Roll," the baker murmurs, voice low against the clank of distant wagons. Alfie lifts a half-stale roll from the stoop, its crust as hard as charcoal, but still somehow fragrant. He tucks it into the folds of his coat, careful not to crush its brittle form. The baker watches him with the same impartial detachment that a miller might view a sack of grain. Useful, enough to be measured, but not to be handled with sentimental care. Alfie retreats into the shadow, counting his steps as though mapping the way home. 1, 2, 3, past the broken cartwheel. 4, 5, under the hanging laundry. 6, against the chipped stone wall. At each marker, he eases a flake of crust from the roll and stuffs it into his pocket. The crumbs, he thinks wryly, will be his own private treasure, small tokens of a triumph that cost nothing more than a coin, and the baker's quiet sympathy. When he finally sits on the edge of a nearby drainpipe, a throne of sorts for a hungry boy, he lifts the roll to his lips. The first bite crackles against his teeth like a small firework. The crumb inside is dry, but it yields to careful chewing, releasing the faint sweetness of barley and stale warmth. He closes his eyes, savouring each fragment, knowing that each swallow edges him further from the gnawing emptiness in his belly. Even as he eats, Alfie's mind remains alert to the pitfalls of his success. If Master Cole's men, or worse, the workhouse guards, should catch him at this illicit feast, the lash of a whip would seem kinder than the master's disappointment. He swallows the last morsel, presses his hand to his thigh, feeling the dent of each kernel, and stands, straightening his coat as if nothing happened, as if he had merely paused his day's labour for a moment of reflection. The alley returns to its muted hush as he retreats. Behind him, the baker's stoop bears no sign of intrusion. The flour drifts resume their gentle descent. Alfie knows he carries more than half a loaf in his pockets now. He carries proof that small acts of courage and quiet bargains can feed more than the body, they nourish the soul. With one final glance over his shoulder, he slips back toward the chimney's waiting mouth, the taste of coal-hard crust lingering sweetly on his tongue, and the soft warmth of stolen bread tucked safely against his heart. On Sunday mornings, the streets of Whitechapel take on a hushed reverence, as if the very cobblestones pause to catch their breath. Beneath the towering stone arch of St. Dionysius's church gate, a ragged crowd gathers, men and boys in sooty coats, women clutching infants wrapped in tattered shawls. Alfie approaches with deliberate slowness, mindful of the tightly packed bodies pressing in from either side. Arms brush his ribs, elbows nudge his shoulders. Each movement risks toppling the fragile order that keeps the line from becoming a scramble. Ahead, a damp wooden table stands like an altar of hope. Its surface is scarred with water stains and old cuts, worn smooth by the hands of countless supplicants. Two cloaked matrons hover behind it, their aprons streaked with broth drips and flour residue. One holds a ladle the size of a small bowl, its brass lip dulled by years of stirring. The other clutches a stack of coarse pewter bowls, each one bearing the faint ring of previous handouts. Alfie edges closer, feet shifting on the uneven ground, a patchwork of cobbles and splintered wooden planks, salvaged from discarded crates. He can smell the faint perfume of damp wool from the matron's cloaks, mingling with the richer aroma of cooking onions and sea salt. The steam rising from the soup creates a gauzy screen between the servers and the served, a smoky veil that belies the thinness of the meal. When it is his turn, Alfie steps forward just enough to extend his bowl. The matron's hand, lined and steady, dips the ladle into a bubbling cauldron hidden beneath a woolen cover. He hears the soft gurgle of liquid meeting liquid as the broth pours into his bowl. Scattered barley grains swirl in the shallow pool, and a few wisps of limp cabbage float on the surface. The colour is a pale straw, barely masking the water's translucence. Alfie cradles the warm bowl against his chest, feeling the heat seep through the pewter and into his palms. He lifts the bowl to his lips and sips, the broth sliding down his throat in a ribbon of gentle warmth. A faint taste of vegetable lingers, onion sweetness, cabbage's green edge, and a whisper of salt that reminds him of distant tides. With each swallow, the chill in his bones recedes slightly, replaced by the kind of comfort only heat in the belly can bring. Behind him, the line shifts as other boys receive their portions. The hush of gratitude passes from lip to lip. Quiet thank yous, a nod of the head, a brief bow. Alfie catches the gaze of a boy to his right, whose eyes glisten, not with shame, but with shared relief. In that glance, Alfie senses the paradox of charity. The act of taking brands him among the lowest of the low, yet it also knits him into a fleeting community of necessity, where each handout is a small thread in a tapestry of collective survival. He sets the bowl on the curb, holding it steady with both hands as he scoops up the first spoonful. The rhythm of eating is unhurried. Sip, swallow, wait, like a slow march measured by heartbeats rather than steps. Alfie notices the scuffed edges of his spoon, the tiny dent where it struck the table's lip, and the faint chime it makes with each contact. He suppresses a smile at the incongruity, such a modest sound in a moment so fraught. As he finishes the last drop, Alfie wipes his chin on the back of his sleeve, an action both practical and habitual. He rises, feeling the collective weight of the waiting crowd shift as he steps aside. For a moment he stands at the edge of the gathering, bowl empty, body warmed, mind alert to the fragile boundaries between dignity and disgrace. Before he turns away, Alfie offers a small nod to the matrons, a silent thank you that requires no words. They return his gesture with a curt tilt of the head, their eyes softening with recognition of yet another soul carried, however briefly, on the currents of mercy. He tucks the pewter bowl under his arm, adding it to the bulging heap he carries back to the sweep house, where it will be washed and returned for another morning's distribution. Each bowl is a vessel of both necessity and memory, its empty shell echoing the warmth he still feels in his chest. Stepping beyond the gate, Alfie breathes in the London air anew, this time scented with faint church incense and the promise of shared humanity. The city's bustle resumes around him. The clip-clop of hoofs, the murmur of vendors, the distant clang of factory whistles, but within him lingers the quiet knowledge that, for a moment, his hunger was met, not by flue and ladder, but by open hands and open hearts. Alfie had become accustomed to the hush of the chimney's interior, the muted scrape of his brush, the soft click of rope against brick, the distant echo of London's bustle reduced to a faint heartbeat. On that afternoon, however, the flue betrayed him in the most elemental way. A single ember, smouldering unseen in a yawning hearth below, flickered back to life just as he passed. He was midway through the ascent, heart steady and hands sure, when a distant hiss, so subtle it might have been a breath, caressed his ear. For an instant, Alfie paused, mid-sweep, brush suspended inches from the brick, his senses sharpened. The acrid tang of tar laid bare, the faint tickle of ash drifting down, and the telltale warmth that pulsed ahead, far hotter than the flue's norm. He swallowed, tasting a hint of smoke on his tongue, and pressed onward in cautious curiosity rather than fear. Then the ember ignited. At first it was no more than a dull glow, like a stubborn star refusing to fade, but in the cramped darkness, that glow swelled into a living flame. Before Alfie could even draw breath, the brick walls erupted into an orange flare that consumed his vision. Soot rained down around him, fine, black snowflakes that settled on his scalp and bristled under his coat. For a heartbeat, the flue transformed into a furnace. The heat enveloped him, a fierce, insistent caress that burned through his patched garments and singed the hairs at the nape of his neck. Instinct took over. Alfie's muscles coiled, and he abandoned the measured sweep he had practiced 1,000 times for raw survival. The rope at his side, scorched with each passing second, the hemp fibers hissing as they absorbed flame. He felt each strand give way to heat, as though the rope itself were exhaling in alarm. His hands, slick with soot and sweat, clenched the brush shaft until his knuckles bled white beneath the grime. He scrambled upward with urgent determination, bricks cracking underfoot and sending showers of grit into his eyes. Each foothold was a gamble. The heat warped the flue's geometry so that ledges bowed and mortar crumbled. Alfie's breath came in shallow gulps, the air tasting of char and fear, his lungs rebelling against the fiery onslaught. He could feel the metal of his scraper belt buckle grow uncomfortably warm, a blistering reminder of how close he teetered to destruction. Yet, amid the chaos, Alfie noticed details with a near-disbelieving clarity. The flame's orange tongue licked the brick in playful arcs, illuminating hidden textures, the waves of ancient mortar, the faint striations carved by long-departed masons. Each glowing fissure seemed to tell a story of countless chimneys faced and conquered, of children like him who had skirted death in these stone corridors. The heat hammered against his ears, but he found himself oddly attentive to that silent narrative. He reached a narrow shelf, a smoke shelf where debris once collected peacefully, and flung himself onto it, chest heaving in urgent rhythms. Above him, the flare began to subside as the ember's fuel waned, but the reprieve was fleeting. Heat continued to pulse, a living thing that refused to die. Alfie's shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, and soot clung to every droplet, each a tiny prism reflecting the dying glow, drawing a small, desperate laugh from his throat, a humour born of disbelief. He shook his head and tested the rope with a cautious twist. Its fibres, though singed, still held. He wrapped an arm around the flue's side, pressing his ear against the stone to catch the faintest hint of cool air above. A distant whisper of wind, like a promise, trickled downward. He counted his heartbeat against that whisper, 1, 2, 3, until the heat no longer felt infinite and the rope no longer crackled in protest. Summoning every reserve of strength, Alfie hauled himself upward, away from the ember's dying glow. Each pull was slow, deliberate, an act of defiance against gravity and flame alike. When at last he breached the flue's mouth, he tumbled onto the rooftop in a shower of soot and sweat, gasping in the clear, bracing air. The city's usual clangor welcomed him, a chorus of carriage wheels, distant shouts, and seagulls over the Thames. He lay on the slates for a long moment, letting the night's chill counteract the flue's heat. His brush lay beside him, bristles bent but intact. The rope, though scorched, coiled obediently. Alfie closed his eyes, feeling the sky's cool breath on his face, tasting the sweet release of survival. He allowed himself a quiet, wry smile. Not many could claim to have outrun fire by fingertips. And as the rooftop shadows stretched and softened in the fading light, Alfie knew that once again he had cheated the corridor of death by the narrowest of margins, and lived to climb another day. Alfie had learned to measure danger, not only by the roar of wind through a flue or the crack of a whip, but by the hush that fell over the graveyards behind St. Mary Axe. On an overcast afternoon, when the city's clamour softened to a distant mumble, he found himself standing before iron gates streaked with rust. Beyond, rows of freshly turned earth waited beneath a sky so pale it threatened to blend into the mist. The air here was cooler, tinged with the damp perfume of moss and peat, and every footstep sent a soft crunch through fallen leaves. Alfie paused at the edge of a clearing where canvas tarps billowed like silent spectres in a slow breeze. Under each tarp lay a small, wrinkled shape. So small, in fact, that the gentle rise and fall of the cloth seemed almost deliberate, as though the boys beneath were merely sleeping. It was only when Alfie noted the stiff outlines of limbs and the way the tarp's edges curled around uneven forms that he remembered these were not dreams, but bodies. A few paces further, local carvers, men whose hands were as certain on chisel as Alfie's were on brush, worked upon simple headstones. Their hammers tapped in a soft, deliberate rhythm, each strike a muted heartbeat marking lives cut short. Alfie watched as one carver gently traced the letters on a newly hewn slab of York stone. The inscription read, in plain capitals, Unneating Chimney Boy. Below, a number, 27, was etched with unexpected precision, as though cataloguing might offer some dignity. Alfie imagined a mother peering through these very gates, hoping to find a name instead of a number. The stones themselves were modest affairs, roughly hewn rectangles with softened edges, their faces bearing the deep grooves of chisels and the faint dust of stone. Alfie knelt beside one, and pressed a fingertip to the cold surface. It felt smooth in patches and rough in others, like a heart that had been both hardened by grief and softened by memory. He inhaled the scent of fresh-cut stone, an aroma that mingled oddly with soot and earth, and for a moment he wondered if these boys ever imagined they would end their days here, entombed by circumstance rather than fate. A stray dog padded past, its nails clicking on flagstones, and Alfie allowed himself a quiet smile at the incongruity. Even here, life found a way to tread lightly. He noted shadows shifting as the tarps stirred, and though he knew better than to linger too long, the rhythm of the carver's tapping pulled him deeper into reflection. Each tap seemed to whisper, "Rememberer." No headstone bore a given name, only the collective moniker of Chimney Boy, anonymous yet united in tragedy. Alfie imagined the roster of souls, unknown Chimney Boy 1, 2, all the way to 27, and felt a pang of sorrow for their lost stories. Each had been stripped not only of life but of identity, marked only by the trade that consumed them. In this anonymity lay a grim lesson. In the sweep's world, a single misstep in a narrow shaft could rewrite a child's story in cold stone. He rose to his feet and took a slow step back, the crunch of gravel underfoot ringing in his ears. The carvers paused in their work, as though granting Alfie a moment of reverence. One of them, a man with a lined face and gentle eyes, offered a slight nod before resuming. Alfie returned the nod, feeling an unexpected kinship with these keepers of memory. As he turned to leave, the mist thickened, folding the tarps and headstones into a soft white cocoon. Behind him, the hammers tapped on, a lullaby for the forgotten. Alfie carried the echoes of that rhythm with him, a reminder that gravity and neglect conspired with equal force to claim lives, and that in the hush between one heartbeat and the next, the chimney's dark embrace could become the graveyard's final whisper. With that, Alfie stepped back into the city's muted bustle, the distant toll of a church bell lingering in his mind. He felt the weight of the carver's stones as a gentle burden on his conscience, a call to remember every silent shape under those tarps, and though his own climb awaited, he moved forward with solemn awareness. Every breath drawn above ground was borrowed time, and every heartbeat a chance to defy the corridor of death he had just witnessed. Alfie had grown accustomed to the predictable perils of the flue, slick soot, tight bends, and the ever-present threat of suffocation, but nothing prepared him for that terrible noon. The sun had climbed high enough to cast a faint glow through the shaded shaft, and Alfie, crouched on a narrow ledge, was coaxing the last stubborn clump of tar loose with his iron scraper. His brush and rope lay momentarily forgotten on the shelf above, as he leaned in to apply just a bit more pressure. In that split second, the ledge gave way. He heard the mortar crack, a brittle snap that echoed through the narrowing corridor like a death knell. Alfie's right boot plunged through the sudden void, sending a shower of fractured brick and soot raining down around him. For a heartbeat, gravity itself seemed to hesitate, then released him into the black unknown. He plummeted with a muffled gasp, arms flailing in futile arcs, the world inverted in a swirl of smoke and brick, heat pressing against his back as he fell. Panic surged hot through his veins. But then, almost by miracle, his fingertips closed around a stray timber beam that jutted from the flue's side. The wood was rough and jagged, splintered from some earlier repair or collapse, and it bit into his palms with sharp insistence. Alfie's muscles screamed in protest as he dangled by his fingertips, the beam swaying beneath his weight. Every breath was a ragged struggle, soot-laden and shallow, each inhale tasting of fear and dust. Yet the beam held. Inch by inch, he inched upward, fingers clawing into the grain, knuckles whitening under the strain. He could feel the rope at his side, coiled but useless, until he freed his hands. Another detail to file away when survival wasn't at stake. Time lost its usual measure. Perhaps only seconds passed, or perhaps minutes. It was impossible to tell when the world had narrowed to the beam and his grip. His legs, momentarily weightless, twitched involuntarily, seeking a foothold that did not exist. He pressed his cheek against the soot-slick wall and tasted grit and ash on his lips. A drop of something warm streaked down his temple, tears or blood, he couldn't tell. Finally, with an agonizing effort, Alfie hauled himself onto a wider ledge, chest heaving, arms trembling like saplings in a gale. He collapsed onto his side, forehead pressed against cold brick, letting the darkness cradle him for a moment. Above him, the flue's shape reasserted itself, a diminishing tunnel that led, he hoped, back to open air. He lay there long enough to feel the city's distant murmur, the muted thrum of carriage wheels, the faint clamour of voices, a church bell tolling somewhere beyond the Thames. The world above carried on, oblivious to the small catastrophe that had nearly claimed him. At last, Alfie forced himself to sit, legs trembling beneath him like saplings in a storm. His fingers brushed away the grit and soot that had glued them to the brick, revealing raw red creases that throbbed with every heartbeat. He retrieved the weighted rope, its once crisp coils now tangled from his desperate flail, and tested it with a gentle tug. It held, humming quietly as though relieved to still bear weight. With painstaking care, Alfie threaded the rope's bitter-smelling strands through a narrow gap, looping them over a sturdy brick ledge. Each movement was measured. He hesitated at every shift as though the flue itself might betray him again. His scraper, abandoned in the fall, lay 10 inches away, its hooked end glinting in the faint light. He reached for it, and with a bruised thumb, flipped it onto his forearm, then wrapped a knotted rope around his wrist. Breathing slowly, he leaned back and tested the makeshift harness. The flue's mortar surface scraped across his shoulder blades, a reminder that safety was an illusion. Yet the rope did its work, anchoring him enough that he could inch his way upward, using both it and the scraper as allies. Soot and tears mingled on his cheeks, streaking into dark rivulets that glittered in the half-light. Alfie allowed himself a small, wry chuckle at the irony. Here he was, a boy who spent mornings hauling coal dust from chimneys, now relying on a frayed rope and a bent scraper to pull himself from death's crawlspace. The humour was black, perhaps, but it steadied his racing pulse. He ascended foot by cautious foot, relishing the faint relief each upward inch brought. The flue walls, once suffocatingly close, began to recede as he approached the plot opening. A gentle breeze drifted downward, carrying the distant sound of gulls over the river. Alfie let that cool breath fill his lungs, tasting salt and freedom in its promise. Finally, with a shuddering exhale, he hoisted himself through the chimney pot, and found himself once more under the open sky. He tumbled onto the slate roof, limbs splayed, and lay still as the wind washed soot from his face. Above him, the grey afternoon light painted London's rooftops in soft chiaroscuro tiles glimmering, chimneys standing sentinel, the river a ribbon of silver. Alfie closed his eyes, letting the cool air soothe the burn in his lungs and the ache in his arms. He thought of the narrow ledge that had betrayed him, the stray beam that had saved him, and the rope that had refused to fray. In the hush that followed, he felt both humbled and triumphant. Humbled by the flue's merciless power, triumphant that his small hands still gripped life's rope. After a few moments, he sat up, brushing shattered pieces of brick from his patched coat. He coiled the rope with careful precision, as though ensuring no future kink could undo him. Then, with deliberate calm, he gathered his tools, the brush, the scraper, the rope, and stood. Each step was measured, grounding him once more in the rhythm of his trade. The city outside knew nothing of his trauma. Shops remained open, children played in alleys below, and the distant whistle of a steam barge rose from the Thames. Alfie allowed himself one final glance at the chimney that had nearly claimed him. He tipped an imaginary hat to its shadowed mouth, a gesture both cheeky and respectful. With a gentle sigh, he turned away and began the day's work anew. each sweep of the brush, each knot tied, each measured step up the flue, now infused with the quiet knowledge that survival, like soot, is earned one breath at a time. Beneath the broad arches of London Bridge, where the river's sigh mingles with the city's distant clamour, lies a hidden world known only to the chimney sweep boys. Here, in the cool dusk light filtering through moss-streaked stones, they've claimed a sanctuary of shadowed alcoves and narrow niches. The rocks are damp from the Thames's occasional rise, lending the air a faint brine that cuts through the ever-present tang of soot. Alfie creeps in first, letting the muted splash of river water on mossy flagstones announce his arrival without sound. He pauses at the mouth of a low tunnel, barely tall enough for him to stoop, and slips inside. One by one, nearly 24 boys follow, their soot-smeared faces and patchwork coats blending into the stonework. Here, in the cathedral hush of under-bridge arches, the world beyond seems muted, softened by the river's breath. Within these walls, each niche serves as a small refuge. Alfie knows them all. There's the library alcove, where scraps of stolen primer pages are tucked beneath a loose brick. The hearth nook, where a single battered candle offers enough light to read stolen scraps of scripture, and the snack hollow, stashed with dry, stale rolls pilfered from bakers at dawn. Each alcove feels carved by purpose, as though the stones themselves have bent to shelter these children's hopes. Tonight, Alfie settles into the snack hollow. He withdraws a half-roll crust still crisp, but interior dry, and breaks it into rough wedges. A hush falls as he offers them out. Boys reach forward with cold-arced hands, accepting pieces with nods of gratitude. The first bites yield a familiar crackle, and then a rush of stale warmth. Alfie closes his eyes, savouring the simple pleasure, and allows a quiet, rueful grin. He never imagined bread could taste so dear. Across the way, Tug Murphy, when he's not watching his own back, leans into the rough stone and exhales stories of safer master routes for the next day. "Old Finsbury," he whispers, voice hushed yet certain. "He only sends you up 2 flues in the morning, then you get a smoke break by the bakehouse." The boys lean in, drawing hope from each word. In this place, information is as precious as crusts of bread. Faint laughter bubbles up. Subtle, soft, when one boy recalls the time Alfie tried to teach them semaphore with chimney brush handles, and nearly whacked Tug in the shin. They clutch each other's shoulders against a sudden damp chill, exchanging warmth more powerful than any blanket. The stones cradle the sound, bouncing whispers and giggles in gentle arcs that weave through the arches. Beyond the camaraderie, the alcoves nurture secret learning. Tonight, Alfie retrieves a scrap of primer he rescued from a discarded bundle near the market. The pages are smudged, the ink faded, but each letter feels like a stepping stone to another world. By the frail glow of a single candle, he traces A for apple, B for bread, and C for chimney, a symbolic reclamation of their identity. The other boys press close, watching the flame tremble against the stone, and memorize as though the letters themselves could lead them out of soot and servitude. In this hush, solidarity feels profound. The boys lean on one another, physically and in spirit, knowing that beyond these arches, masters wield whips and cold indifference. Here they wield secret smiles and stolen crumbs. Each shared joke, each whispered tip about a fatigue master, each letter learned in the candle's flicker becomes a small rebellion against the cruel world above. When the night wind rises, rattling the candle's flame, Alfie gathers the scraps and stores them under the loose brick. He feels the quiet swell of pride. They have stolen moments of light in darkness. As he stands dusting soot from his trousers, he takes one last look at the alcove's arches, silent witnesses to their pact of survival. Rising from their sanctuary, the boys drift out one by one, slipping back into London's labyrinth of fog and cobblestone. Alfie pauses at the tunnel's mouth to inhale the river's hush, letting it fortify him. Then, with shadowed hearts and gentle defiance, they melt into the night, bound by soot, by secrecy, and by a steadfast belief that brotherhood can birth courage, even in the deepest gloom. A single scrap of parchment clings to a damp wooden beam beneath London Bridge, its corners weighted down by coal-blacked pebbles pressed into the rotted wood. The page trembles slightly in the river's whispering draughts, etched with names in a child's uneven hand. Alfie crouches beside it, the rough beam pressing into his knee as he studies the list. Billy Morgan, Peter Dale, Samuel Finch among them, and feels each syllable weigh on his chest like unseen mortar. The parchment's edges curl with moisture, and faint smudges of soot blur the letters, as though the very ink wept coal dust into the paper. Surrounding each name are crude drawings scratched in soot, a bent chimney sweep's brush for Billy, a tiny rope coiled at Peter's side, a half-formed ladder beside Samuel's. These simple symbols serve as mementos, tiny memorials crafted by those left to climb, honouring the boys who never climbed down. Alfie traces one soot line with a fingertip, careful not to tear the brittle page, and feels the rough grit press into his skin. Around him, the alcove's hush deepens. The river's distant sighs and the soft drip of water from mossy stones compose a subdued choir, underscoring the weight of absence. Alfie glances at his fellow sweet boys, their faces cloaked in semi-darkness, soot-streaked and solemn. They kneel shoulder to shoulder on the cold stone slabs, knees sinking into the dampness, as though seeking solidarity with those they have lost. No one speaks. Words feel too grand, too clumsy for this moment. Instead, they bow their heads, offering silent prayers or defiant vows, each mind wandering toward personal promises. I will survive. I will climb again. I will remember. Alfie allows his gaze to drift upward, following the parchment's tremble into the arch's skeletal expanse. The rough-hewn beams overhead cradle the alcove like ancient ribs, protective, enduring. In their folds, candlelight flickers in scattered nooks, deliberately placed to honor each name. The candles are nothing more than stubs by now, short, blackened with soot, but their feeble glow carves halos of amber around the parchment, lending the names a quiet sanctity. Alfie catches the shimmer and inhales, tasting the acrid hint of melting wax, mingled with the ever-present tang of river moisture. A small breeze sneaks in, carrying with it the faintest echo of children's laughter from distant alleyways, life persisting beyond grief. Alfie offers a whispered Godspeed to the fallen, a phrase learned from the ragged psalm books he'd glimpsed in the parish. His fingers brush each name in turn, a slow benediction. Billy Morgan, Peter Dale, Samuel Finch. With each he imagines the boy alive, brushing soot from hair like grains of sand, trading jokes in dank garrets, climbing delicate ladders in chipped boots. He straightens, rising on trembling knees, and steps back to allow the others their space. Alfie's eyes linger on the parchment, one side curled inward, the other pinned with a shutter nail that glints like a single silver eye. The names seem to breathe, whispering their stories across the damp wood. How Billy laughed at narrow ledges, how Peter found a secret ledge to rest upon, how Samuel's rope slipped in the dark. In those recollections, the boys find both sorrow and instruction warnings etched into memory sharper than any chisel. To Alfie, the parchment serves as a living ledger of survival stakes. It reminds him that each ascent carries the quiet risk of eternity beneath the flue's stones. Yet in that same weight lies a spark of resolve, to climb with care, to share each secret route, to mark triumphs as loud as loss. With a gentle exhale, Alfie reaches forward once more, smoothing the parchment surface as if comforting a friend. Then, in a single deliberate motion, he steps away, letting the candlelight flicker over the names a final time. Around him, the other boys rise, their shoulders brushing in solidarity, and slip from the alcove one by one, carrying the memory of the fallen within their breaths. As Alfie emerges into London's misted dusk, he glances back at the beam, and at the names that tether him to both grief and promise. In the hush that follows, he senses their voices guiding each step, a chorus of whispered courage, urging him upward, onward, and always home. In the dim glow beneath London Bridge's arches, Alfie and Tug huddle close, sharing the warmth of a single tattered shawl. Its fabric is thin, as fragile as a moth's wing, and knitted from coarse wool that once might have been crimson. Now it bears the patina of countless nights pressed against damp stone. The threads are fuzzed, the edges frayed to a whisper, and faint salt stains betray its time at sea. When wrapped around two shivering bodies, however, it transforms into something more, a humble fortress against the world's cold indifference. Alfie drapes one corner of the shawl over Tug's shoulders, noting with gentle amusement how it gobbles up the master's soot before it can reach the boy's collar. Tug, in turn, tugs the opposite end snug around Alfie's lean frame, the shawl's worn fibers tickling his neck. Each fold offers a small reprieve, a shared boundary that distinguishes sanctuary from the biting winds outside. In this patch of shadow and stone, the shawl sings its own lullaby, a muffled rustle that soothes even as the river's distant rush hums in the background. Beside them, Tucked into a niche carved by water and time, rests a chipped clay pipe. Its bowl is cracked, revealing a spiderweb of fractures that glimmer when candlelight spills across it. A passing sailor, grateful for a bit of help he once received, presented it to Alfie with a crooked grin and a promise, for the nights you need to dream of home. Now it passes from boy to boy, each inhaling a small pinch of stolen tobacco, dark, sweet, and faintly peppered with sea breeze. When Alfie lifts the pipe, he inhales gently, letting the smoke curl around his senses like a slow-moving ghost. He exhales in a soft plume, watching the tendrils swirl in the alcove's half-light before dissolving into damp air. Tug accepts the pipe next, his lips pursed as he draws in the aroma of peppered leaf and river mist. He offers a conspiratorial wink to Alfie, who suppresses a chuckle. Even in this austere refuge, a shared puff becomes a small act of ceremony, an assertion that they are neither paupers nor specimens of child labour, but boys with hearts that crave ordinary comforts. The shawl and the pipe become talismans, objects invested with more meaning than their battered exteriors suggest. They anchor reality to something kinder. Memories of hearth fires, of hearthside tales spun by mothers and grandmothers, of sea voyages home, when the world above seems defined by flues and whips. These tokens whisper of other possibilities. Each time Alfie adjusts the shawl's fit or passes the pipe, he affirms that he is more than a creature of soot and servitude. Around them, other sweep boys pause their hushed chatter to watch the ritual. Some trace the shawl's faded pattern, an indistinct swirl that may have once been a flower, while others steady the pipe, studying its brittle surface as though seeking clues to its maker. In these moments, the alcove's damp stones bear silent witness to a community of small rebellions, where each shared comfort is a spark against despair. A subtle humour weaves through their gathering. Tug teases Alfie about his solemn approach to the pipe, as though he were some grand statesman delivering a speech. Alfie, in turn, mocks Tug's exaggerated cough whenever he forgets to crimp the clay's cracked lip. Their laughter is soft, almost spectral, but it ripples through the alcove, pressing back the quiet weight of the bridge's stone. When the final embers of candlelight gutter low, Alfie folds the shawl with deliberate care, smoothing each crease as though wrapping hope itself. Tug tucks the pipe into a small leather pouch, patting it while it rests against his side. The tokens return to their places, shawl draped over a protruding stone, pipe nestled in its nook, ready for the next night's reunion. Each placement is a promise kept that they will return, that the shawl will shield them, that the pipe will carry familiar warmth into their lungs. Rising to leave, Alfie brushes a last wisp of soot from the shawl and bows his head in thanks to the silent river flowing overhead. The tokens remain behind, waiting patiently for the boy's return. And as Alfie steps back into London's fog-laced streets, he carries within him a small, steadfast brilliance. The knowledge that even in the darkest of arches, comfort can be stolen, shared, and reborn anew. Alfie draws the primer from his coat with almost reverent fingers, cradling it as though it were the finest treasure, rather than a pilfered relic. The leather cover is cracked, its corners softened by countless hands, some eager, some trembling. Where once a schoolboy's name might have been embossed, only a faint indentation remains. Alfie's own soot-streaked thumb glides across the frayed binding, feeling the pulse of history that still lingers in its spine. Within the hideout's alcove beneath London Bridge, the boys huddle close around a single candle. Its flame quivers in the draught, casting the primer's pages in a soft, unsteady glow. Alfie opens the book to a ragged page, edges darkened by finger oil and damp stone, and inhales the mingled scent of aging parchment and river mist. The ink is faded, yet the letters stand resolute. A, B, C, each a quiet monument to possibility. He traces the curves of the letter F with his fingertip, pronouncing it in a whisper. F, F. The candlelight trembles against the walls as he moves to the next letter R, E, and so on until the word emerges. Freedom. The word hangs between them, vibrant and improbable, a promise that the world extends beyond soot-choked flues and ragged labour. Alfie closes his eyes, allowing the syllables to linger like a prayer. Around him, the other boys watch in hushed attention, breathing in unison. For many of them, printed words are as rare as a smooth stone in Whitechapel. Here, in this secret classroom of shadows, the primer is more than a book. It is a blade against ignorance, slicing through the darkness one word at a time. Alfie turns the page, revealing LOR, its letters lined in bold strokes. He recites it softly, LOR, and imagines clauses and statutes that might one day protect a child from indenture or guarantee safe passage on a cold morning. The concept feels distant, like sunlight in a coal mine, but he clings to it with the same tenacity that keeps him alive in narrow shafts. Each new word is a shard of glass thrown at the walls of his confinement, each sentence a map pointing beyond the soot. He pauses to let the others ask questions. Tug leans forward, eyes bright. "What comes after law?" he whispers. Alfie scans the primer. P-A-N-C-I-L. Pencil, he reads, and they share a small grin. An object so ordinary, yet in their world it is a mighty tool. The flickering candle reveals smudges on their faces, coal dust streaks that accentuate their pale cheeks, and Alfie marvels at the contrast. Studious concentration painted on grime. He wonders if the primer's original owner ever dreamed it would find use here, lighting minds in the underbelly of the city rather than in a proper classroom. Page by page, they work through the primer's simple lessons. Mother, father, child. Each word weaving a tapestry of relationships they yearn to know. In learning these words, they learn to name their own lives, rather than be reduced to chimney boy. The process is slow, deliberate, an unhurried rhythm that lulls the mind even as it expands its horizons. Between lessons, Alfie pauses to share subtle jokes. Like, why do pencils make horrible dancers? They always draw to a halt. The boys stifle chuckles that echo softly in the stone. The humour a gentle reminder that they remain children despite their hardened surroundings. Hours pass unnoticed, until the candle gutter warningly low. Alfie closes the primer, pressing the pages together as though sealing a pact. He tucks it back into his coat, its weight a comforting presence against his chest. The other boys rise, brushing soot from their coats and casting one last glance at the primer's resting place. As they slip back into the city's labyrinth of fog and cobblestone, Alfie carries with him more than letters and words. He carries the quiet power of knowledge, each syllable a step upward, each sentence a breath of fresh air in a life long defined by smoke. In the stale, flickering light of a hidden alcove, the stolen primer has become their compass, guiding them toward a future where the darkness of ignorance may finally be dispelled. As dusk settles over the Thames, the hush beneath London Bridge deepens into a solemn expectancy. Alfie tightens the patchwork shawl around his shoulders and peers into the shadowed alcove. Tonight, as promised, the weary Methodist preacher will arrive with his bundle of psalm books, thin volumes whose cracked spines and moth-eaten covers speak of 100 parsonage libraries. The preacher appears at the mouth of the tunnel, stepping lightly as though wary of disturbing even the smallest stone. His coat, once a sober black, now shows traces of river mist and chimney dust. A broad-brimmed hat shields his lined face, and beneath it, Alfie catches a glint of kindly eyes that have seen too much. In one hand, the preacher carries a small sack containing psalms, flannel wrapped to protect their brittle pages. In the other, a lantern whose golden glow dances across the damp walls. He settles into a crouch beside a low bench, a plank of salvaged timber bolted to the stone, and beckons the boys closer. The air is cool, laced with the river's brine, and the perpetual tang of soot, and Alfie's heart quickens not with fear, but anticipation. The preacher's visits are illicit yet essential, stolen moments of learning that feed the spirit as surely as stolen gruel feeds the belly. With deliberate care, the preacher unwraps a psalm book, revealing yellowed pages etched with neat, flowing script. He opens to a passage on justice. He hath not dealt with us after our sins, nor rewarded us according to our iniquities. The words float in the candlelight, gentle yet resolute, and Alfie watches the preacher's lips move in quiet recitation. Each syllable feels like a seed planted in dark earth, promising growth beyond soot-choked horizons. Justice, the preacher murmurs, voice a low pulse. Not only in heavens above, but on these streets. You, my young friends, deserve more than the lash and the flue. His gaze sweeps across the boys' soot-streaked faces, and Alfie senses both comfort and danger in that look. If Master Cole discovered these lessons, the preacher would find his linen coat scorched as severely as a chimney sweep's woolen jacket. Yet here he is, risking reprisal to share words that could light minds broader than any hearth fire. The preacher turns to mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Alfie leans forward, feeling the lantern's warmth flicker against his cheek. He imagines mercy as a soft thing, perhaps a hand lifted from the whip's handle, perhaps a master's nod when a boy returns with extra soot. Mercy is the currency they trade in secret. Between passages, the preacher pauses to smile, a brief, rueful upturn of aged features. "You might find the pew more comfortable," he whispers, "but I suspect your seats chart a finer sermon." The boys shift on the damp stone, suppressing smiles that rise in their chests. The preacher's humor is a subtle balm, easing the tension of their clandestine classroom. Alfie's eyes drift to the psalmbook's edges, where tiny annotations mark favored lines. He spots a pressed violet petal between pages, a memento from some happier hour, its purple hue deepened by age. He imagines the flower's life, once vibrant against a spring meadow, now preserved as a token of hope. As the preacher guides them through the next verse, Alfie practices tracing letters with his finger. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." The tactile act of following inked lines feels revolutionary, an assertion that he too belongs in a world governed by written laws and whispered dreams, not just smoke and labor. When the final verse fades into the alcove's stillness, the preacher carefully closes the book, announcing in a soft finality, "Carry these words with you. Let them guide your hands as you climb, and your hearts as you live." Alfie nods, swallowing the lump in his throat, grateful for lessons delivered beyond soot and spectacle. The preacher gathers his books, their bulk a promise of knowledge yet to come, then tips his hat in farewell. The lantern's glow recedes as he rises, leaving behind a hush punctuated only by the river's distant breath. Alfie watches until the preacher's silhouette melts into the dusk, then sinks to his knees, pressing his hands into the damp stone. In that quiet, Alfie senses the shaky line between safety and discovery. The preacher's hidden lessons ripple through him, soft liberations that cannot be confined by walls or overseers. He closes his eyes, committing the words to memory. Justice, mercy, a kingdom not of dust, but of written promise. And in the slow return to London's gaslit streets, Alfie carries more than soot on his skin. He bears the seeds of a larger world waiting beyond each flue's narrow mouth. Alfie settles into the alcove's quiet corner, spreading a handful of broadsheet clippings across his lap as if laying out a map to some distant land. The paper is crisp at the edges where it has dried in the sun, yet damp and pliable toward the center, stained by soot and river mist. He brushes a few stray ash motes from the headlines, each one a ragged testament to newsprint's journey from printing press to gutter to his eager hands. By the flicker of a single candle, Alfie scans the text. His thumb traces the uneven columns. Parliament debates child labour reform. Lord Shaftesbury speaks on chimney sweeps. New poor law under scrutiny. The ink scent is honeyed and thick, redolent of fresh pages tempered by London's coal and damp stone. Alfie inhales deeply, letting the aroma mingle with the familiar tang of flue tar on his clothes. He smooths the largest clipping flat against his knee, a report of heated words exchanged in the House of Commons. He reads aloud in a low murmur. Miss Shaftesbury contends that no child under the age of 12 should be forced into cramped flues. The syllables roll off his tongue, carrying the stately cadence of a distant world. He imagines the ornate chamber, varnished wood, high-ceilinged arches, men in frock coats debating with the polite gravitas of gentlemen, rather than the harsh blade of a master's whip. Alfie's mind drifts to the swaying figures in that august hall, unsure if their words carry true weight, or are merely polite gestures in a performance for the gallery. Yet, on the page, the promise of laws unfurls like a banner, rules written by candlelit gentlemen that might one day bind masters rather than sons. The idea makes Alfie smile, subtle and wry, as though amused by the notion that a scrap of paper could halt a man's whip. He turns to a smaller clipping tucked beneath the first, a transcript of voices raised in defense of proper oversight and moral obligation. He recognizes snippets: "We must not trade human flesh for profit," and "a nation's greatness measured by how it treats its weakest." Alfie whispers the phrases, savoring their rhythm. They sound like verses from a hymn, and he wonders if laws could be sung as psalms against injustice. Between the columns are advertisements: lace for ladies, patent medicines, Ripley's circus, reminders of a world that turns heedless of child labour's toll. He imagines the audience in the gallery shifting in their seats as the circus poster caught their eye, then refocusing on clauses meant to shield them from responsibility. Alfie tucks the advertisement aside, chuckling softly at the thought that gentility might be more easily swayed by a lion tamer than a lawmaker's plea. As he pores over the broadsheets, his mind sketches a path beyond soot-choked chimneys. A London where statutes enforce breaks instead of beatings, where masters fear indictment more than a stray ember, where children read primers instead of flue walls. He pictures himself grown, perhaps a clerk in Whitehall, sliding documents down to the clerk's table, stamping each with the authority of reform. In these daydreams, the clink of the inkwell and the rustle of parchment become as comforting as bedtime lullabies. Yet, every so often, Alfie's gaze drifts to the cramped alcove walls, to the damp stones that have sheltered him and his friends. He recognizes the tension between dream and reality. The alcove's shadows hold both hope and hardship. He allows a breathy laugh, an acknowledgement that laws, however well penned, cannot simply erase years of soot or break the habit of fear in young hearts. He reverently folds the clippings, stacking them by size, the largest on the bottom, the smallest atop, as though organizing layers of possibility. The candle's flame gutters, and Alfie closes his eyes, committing key phrases to memory. No child under 12, proper oversight, moral obligation. Each becomes a seed he plants in the dark, trusting that tomorrow or the day after, some gardener among the lawmakers will water them into bloom. With deliberate calm, he tucks the clippings into a leather pouch hidden beneath his coat, next to the primer and the psalm book. In that pouch lies his own small arsenal of change, a primer that spells out freedom, psalms that promise mercy, and broadsheets that herald reform. Rising from the stone floor, Alfie brushes his hands together, scattering a few motes of ash. As he steps back into London's fog-wreathed streets, he carries with him more than stolen pages. He carries the quiet certainty that one day, laws will be written not to bind sons to flues, but to bind masters to mercy. Late one afternoon, after a whipping so sharp that the sting lingered in his ribs, Alfie crept alongside Tug through the winding alleys back to Master Cole's lodgings. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows that pooled like ink across the cobbles. Alfie's heart still drummed with indignation. Each lash felt like a personal debt to be repaid in kind. Tug led the way to a narrow door marked by years of grease and soot. "The kitchen's just through here," he whispered, voice careful as a cat's step. Alfie followed, noticing the faint aroma of roasting meat and simmering pottage that promised comfort he dared not taste. Inside, the kitchen's hearth yawned wide beneath a flue whose bricks glowed faintly from the day's fires. They paused at the threshold. The cook, a broad-shouldered woman whose apron bore the scars of spilled fat, turned her back to them as she ladled broth into a chipped pot. Her convenience was their opportunity. Alfie and Tug exchanged a glance that blended mischief with resolve. Tonight, they would sabotage the stove flue. Slipping past kettles and coals, Alfie retrieved the small pile of soot bricks they'd secreted earlier. The bricks were nothing more than compressed lumps of flue dust, fragments they'd pried loose during previous climbs, and stored beneath the back stairs. Tug held up a single brick, its edges crumbly, and grinned. "For every lash, one brick," he murmured, flicking the loose bits onto Alfie's shoulder. Alfie stifled a chuckle at the absurdity of brushing shoulder of soot in the soprano of culinary harmony. They approached the flue's entrance. Tug wedged a soot brick into the narrow seam between header and kettle grate, while Alfie jiggled the kettle stand to loosen more bricks from the pile. Each insertion felt like slipping a silent note into a forbidden symphony. When the chute had 3 bricks spaced evenly, they stepped back, brushing soot from their fingers and adjusting patched coats as though nothing had happened. Moments later, the cook, oblivious, stoked the fire and slid fresh embers beneath the kettle. Almost immediately, a dark cloud rose up the flue, roiling with unnatural force. Smoke billowed into the kitchen, curling around the cook's legs and cracking a haze across the low ceiling. Her eyes widened in alarm, and she slammed the stove door shut, hoping to starve the blaze of air. But the blockage forced smoke elsewhere, into the cook's face, thick and acrid as a burning haystack. She flailed, coughing curses that rattled the pots and pans. "Bloody flue's gone mad," she roared, brandishing a ladle like a battle axe. Ash drifted down from the chimney mouth, puffing out in sad little clouds that whispered of chimney boys' narrow escapes. Alfie and Tug pressed their ears against the kitchen's outer wall, sharing a grin that stole warmth from the cook's fury. The alley outside crackled with her yells as smoke wafted through a broken window, thick enough to coat coats with a fresh patina. Tug clapped Alfie on the shoulder, soot flecks dancing in the golden evening light. "That'll teach him," he whispered, voice rich with satisfaction. They lingered until the smoke dispersed, then slipped away before the cook could peer out and spot their soot-smeared faces. Alfie paused under a street lamp, running a hand through his hair, and feeling the crisp evening air sweep away the smoke's tang. He allowed himself a quiet chuckle. Petty revenge had never felt so sweet or so necessary. In the calm that followed, Alfie reflected on the axe's ripples. It was more than mischief. It was a small rebellion, a reminder that even the lowest could strike back. The kitchen's sabotage was a spark in the darkness, a message delivered in soot and smoke that chimney boys, though bound by flues and lashes, remained masterful of cunning and courage. With that comforting thought, Alfie turned toward home, the alley's lanterns guiding his steps. Behind him, Master Cole's kitchen would speak of clogged flues and charred tempers, but for Alfie, each brick wedged in place had built a quiet fortress of defiance in his heart. The sky had been weeping all morning, a steady drizzle that turned the cobbles of Whitechapel into a slick ribbon of pewter. By mid-afternoon the rain had become a gentle roar, muffling the usual clang of carriage wheels and distant factory whistles. Alfie squinted through the downpour, boots squelching in mud, as he made his way toward the yard behind Master Cole's sweep house. Today, something in the air felt different, less like the usual dread, more like a promise carried on the wind. Gathered beneath a tattered tarpaulin awning, a group of match girls huddled shoulder to shoulder with sweep boy apprentices. Their faces, streaked with soot and rain, were set with quiet resolve. Even the match girls' phosphorescent tips, normally so bright, were dampened by the drizzle, giving their jackets a muted glow. Alfie approached Tug Murphy, who handed him his willow brush, with a nod that spoke of solidarity rather than mischief. The plan was simple, a single, decisive gesture. When the signal came, a whispered count of 3, each apprentice would fling their brush into the largest puddle they could find. The brushes, once rigid and purposeful, would become soggy splashes of willow and iron. In that fleeting moment, chimneys across London would gape unclean, and masters for once would find themselves helpless. A moment later Tug's voice cut through the pattering rain. 1, 2, with synchronized abandon, Alfie and his comrades hurled their brushes skyward. The willow heads cut arcs through the air, before landing with soft plop sounds into the muddy water. Each splash echoed like a drumbeat of defiance. Around them, match girls released their own strike tools, wooden sticks once used to ignite matches, sending ripples across the puddles that lapped hungrily at the yard's edges. For a heartbeat, the yard fell silent. Even the rain seemed to pause in awe. The apprentices stood panting, boots planted firmly in mud, eyes alight with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Across the yard's perimeter, a pair of masters emerged from the lodgings, their heavy boots sloshing through rivulets. They halted at the sight, rows of brushes floating tip first, tangled ropes adrift, and the apprentices' empty hands raised in quiet challenge. The master overseeing the yard, a lean fellow with a permanent scowl, barked orders. "Get those brushes. These flues won't clean themselves." His voice cracked through the damp air, but even he hesitated at the sight of his tools, adrift in the mud. Another master scurried to fetch replacement brushes from the storeroom, only to find the door locked and the key pocketed by a match girl with a mischievous grin. Alfie's heart thundered as he watched the masters scramble. He half expected a lash to descend, but the drizzle softened each threat to a mere hiss. The match girls and sweep boys took advantage of this pause, slipping away from the yard's centre toward the hidden alcoves under London Bridge. Behind them, the masters cursed and called for substitutes, but their voices sounded muffled, defeated by the strike's simplicity. Within moments, the masters regrouped. A foreman's shout sent a squad of apprentices to retrieve ropes, brooms, anything that could scrub a flue. The great brush toss had lasted scarcely more than a minute, yet its tremors reverberated through every chimney mouth in the neighbourhood. For the first time, those who wielded the lash found themselves grasping for means to continue the very work they demanded of children. Alfie trudged beside Tug, every step a deliberate imprint in the soft mud. His soaked coat clung to his skin, but he scarcely noticed the damp. He felt instead the cool rush of possibility, that even the smallest gesture, 3 counts, one collective fling, could tilt the world if only for a moment. By the time the rain eased and the brushes were fished from the puddles, the strike had been quelled. Masters barked renewed orders. Children returned to their tasks with downcast eyes and dripping tools. Yet beneath Alfie's ragged resolve, a quiet ember glowed. The great brush toss had been more than an act of spite. It was proof that unity, even in grime and rain, carried power. As Alfie lifted his sodden brush and resumed the day's labours, he carried with him the steady pulse of that defiance. Each scrub of the flue, each twist of rope, became a secret oath that tomorrow, and the day after, and however many days remained, they would remember the tremor of possibility born in a rain-soaked yard, and strike again, if courage summoned them. Beneath a sputtering gas lamp in the alley behind Master Cole's lodging, Alfie spreads a scrap of brown paper atop a barrel. The lamp's flame wavers in the draught, casting long, trembling shadows that dance across the crumpled sheet. He and two comrades, Tug Murphy and young Jacob Bill Harris, lean in, their soot-streaked faces illuminated by the lamp's golden glow. The dampness in the air clings to their coats, lending each breath a faint tang of river mist and coal smoke. Alfie uncorks a stub of ink, its surface black and viscous, and dips a splintered quill into the small pool. The ink beads at the tip like a droplet of tar, threatening to run if he's not careful. He presses the quill to the paper, and a fine crackle of lines emerges, a roughly drawn ribbon representing the Thames, flowing west to east. Tug's fingertip follows the river's course, tracing the path of the coal barges that ply its waters daily. "Here," he murmurs, voice barely above the hiss of the lamp. "We board at Lowford Dock." Alfie nods, shading the area with a quick flick of his wrist, mindful not to smudge the fresh ink. Bill leans closer, eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and excitement. He points to a second line sketched northward, a cargo ship's hull drawn in simple strokes, anchored at Newcastle. "They load coal there," Bill whispers. "Loads enough to hide two boys in the hold." The notion sends a shiver, equal parts chill and thrill, through Alfie's spine. He adds a tiny marker at the ship's stern and underlines it twice, as if underlining a life-changing word in a book. The lamp sputters, then steadies, its fumes curling around their heads like a protective halo. Alfie takes a moment to breathe, the lamplit haze filling his lungs with a warmth that belies the damp chill at his neck. He allows himself a wry smile. Here they are, three ragged chimney sweep boys, plotting escape on a scrap of paper beneath an alley's flickering light. It feels absurd and entirely hopeful. Ink smears under his fingers as he tries to add notes. "Stow in coal hold. Avoid night watch." But the moisture in the air betrays him. Alfie blots the paper against his patched coat, accepting the smudges as part of the plan's character. These blurred lines, he thinks, mirror the uncertainties ahead. Hidden guards, shifting tides, the unknown expanse of open sea. And yet, each smudge is a reminder that they are alive, daring, dreaming. Tug leans back, tapping the barrel's worn wood with quiet satisfaction. "We slip in just before dusk," he says, voice hushed but firm. When the barge unloads and the deckhands turn their backs, Alfie's heart beats a higher rhythm, matching the lamp's flicker. He imagines the coal bed inside the hold, a horizon of black wavelets stretching into midnight. In that stowaway darkness, they would be free, untethered by the master's lash, or the workhouse's chains. Bill adds a final touch, a circle where the coal barge meets a small skiff eager to ferry them to the larger vessel. The circle is shaky, but it glows with promise. Alfie studies it, his mind tracing the route from Thameside shadows to North Sea winds. He can almost taste the salt spray, hear the gulls crying overhead, feel the tremor of the ship's timbers beneath his feet. For a few silent moments, the three boys let the map speak for them. The alley's grime, the damp cobblestones, and the faint hum of London's distant pulse fade into quiet accompaniment to their plan. In that fragile hush, they forge a pact. No matter what, they will seek the horizon's promise together. When the gas lamp finally guttered low, Alfie folded the paper with deliberate care, creasing the river's curve and the ship's hull into memory. He tucked the plan into his coat's inner breast pocket, alongside the primer and the broadsheet clippings. The small pouch of dreams felt heavier than his chimney brush, yet infinitely more precious. They rose, brushing soot from their sleeves, and offering each other a nod of solemn camaraderie. As they slipped back into the maze of alleys, each step carried the steadiness born of purpose. Above them, the gas lamp winked out, leaving only the quiet glow of determined hearts charting a course toward freedom's horizon. Alfie often closes his eyes and lets his imagination carry him away from soot-choked flues to the grand hall of the House of Commons. There, beneath a ceiling of plaster cornices and stained glass windows, he pictures Lord Shaftesbury pacing before the assembled lawmakers. The chamber is hushed, save for the soft shuffle of robes and the faint gleam of candlelight bouncing off brass fixtures. Red carpeted aisles run between rows of polished oak desks, each inkwell and quill poised as though awaiting the next historic pronouncement. From Alfie's hidden vantage, he sees Shaftesbury rise with measured dignity. The Lord's voice, deep, resonant, and unwavering, fills the vaulted space like a rolling tide. These children, Shaftesbury intones, whose lungs are clotted with soot, whose bodies are smaller than the shafts they climb, deserve more than cold charity and harsher punishments. They deserve our laws to protect them. At each phrase, Alfie feels a thunderclap in his chest, as though the words themselves could shatter the flue walls that have confined him. Around the chamber, members shift in carved leather chairs, their faces a tapestry of surprise, sympathy, and in some cases stony indifference. Alfie imagines the lustrous brass nameplates, Mr. Smith, Sir Jones, and wonders if those names carry weight only in ink, or if they ever echo in hearts that feel more than obligation. The oak panels behind them, etched with centuries-old triumphs, seem to whisper that power need not be cruel. Shaftesbury consults a scroll of testimonies gathered from boy sweeps, pages stained with coal dust and trembling ink. Alfie sees a clerk pass each sheet forward, the words detailing narrow escapes, broken bones, and whispered pleas for mercy. Young Master Finch, Shaftesbury reads, spoke of ropes snapped by tar, of breath cut short by coal's choke, and of hope stifled under the lash. Alfie's heart leaps, his own story carried on parchment, alive in the hall of power. The Lord's next words pivot to procedure, but Alfie latches onto the intention. Let us bind these masters to the rule of law so that a child's life is not deemed less than a flue's worth. A hush descends, as if the chamber itself pauses to weigh compassion against tradition. Alfie leans forward in his mind's eye, tasting the hush like a promise. Behind him, Alfie imagines the tapestry of the Thames, unfurling outside the chamber's mullioned windows. The river's steady flow, a reminder that progress, however slow, cannot be stopped. He pictures the shops along Whitechapel Road, where children once chained to chimneys now pause in wonder at the idea that lawmakers might truly listen. A member, perhaps once skeptical, rises to speak in support. If our nation's greatness is measured by how it champions the helpless, then this measure will be our finest hour. Alfie feels warmth bloom in his chest, a gentle hum that echoes the river's current. He pictures that warmth carried on newspaper broadsheets, reaching the mother waiting for her son's return, the mother who dared hope he might climb down one day for good. As the debate crescendos, Alfie imagines the final vote, a roll call of names, the echoing refrain of aye and no, and then the decisive nod that signals victory. He senses a ripple, a subtle shift in the world beyond soot, where tomorrow's children might ascend ladders instead of flues, study primers instead of tar, and breathe air untainted by coal. When Alfie opens his eyes back in the alcove's shadowed hush, the memory of Shaftesbury's booming voice lingers like a benediction. He cups his hands around an imaginary scroll, as though cradling the law itself. And though he remains a small figure beneath London Bridge, lungs still ragged from yesterday's climbs, he carries with him the quiet certainty that these grand words spoken in chambers of oak and brass carry the power to shape a world beyond flue and shadow. Alfie unfolds the brittle sheet of parchment beneath the dim glow of a single lamp in his hideout, its edges curled from countless readings. The printed words of the Chimney Sweepers Regulation Act of 1834 stretch before him in neat columns, each line a promise and a challenge. He runs a soot-streaked finger along the opening clause. No person under the age of 21 shall be compelled or permitted to ascend or descend a chimney flue, and feels the weight of those words settle in his chest like a feathered cloak. The Act's language is formal, almost ceremonial, whereas the practice of employing youth in narrow flues hath proven fatal and injurious. Alfie's eyes trace the ornate capital letters that begin each section, imagining them carved on marble in some distant hall of justice. The scent of fresh ink mingles with the ever-present tang of coal dust on his garments, creating a curious perfume, part civics, part soot, that he breathes in deeply. Each inhalation tastes of hope, tempered by experience. He reads on. Provisions for inspectors to visit master sweepers' workhouses, punishments for non-compliance, and fines proportionate to a master's earnings. Alfie lets the phrases wash over him, a gentle tide of possibility that might carry him beyond the flue's narrow mouth. Yet somewhere between the promise of inspections twice yearly and penalties for bribery, he tastes a bitter undercurrent, frustration. He knows, from whispered lessons and stolen inquiries, that masters often slipped coins into inspectors' pockets, turning law into mere suggestion. He recalls Master Cole's oily handshake and the weight of a shilling tucked beneath the inspector's ledger. The smooth promise of reform feels dampened by reality's stubborn textures, like trying to drink sweet wine from a chipped cup. Still, he clings to the Act's light. He reads the section on penalties, where masters face fines not only for employing underage climbers, but for concealing flues or forging apprentices' ages. Each clause feels like a rung on a ladder. One day, he believes, someone will climb it all the way to justice. He imagines the inspector's ledger as a map, each name crossed off a victory, each fine recorded a small rebellion against the city's soot-blackened traditions. The lamplight flickers as Alfie reaches the final lines. Let this act be enforced for the welfare of youth, so that no child's breath be stifled by coal, nor blood spilt in brick corridors. He closes his eyes, picturing a world where that sentence resonates beyond Parliament's oak doors, echoing in Whitechapel's garrets, and the narrow veins of every flue. Despite the Act's shortcomings, Alfie allows himself a wry, almost amused smile. Subtle humour at the thought that a parchment scroll could tame centuries of chimney-blown smoke and hardened masters. Yet in that smile is also steel, a quiet vow that, whether by law or by stealth, he will strive for the Act's promise. He imagines gathering fellow sweeps, clipping the Act's text to walls and barring doors, reminding each other that written words can outlast whips and flues. He refolds the Act with deliberate care, smoothing its creases as though ironing out the wrinkles in justice itself. As he tucks the parchment into his coat's inner pocket, Alfie feels both triumph and melancholy. Triumph that reformers dared legislate change, melancholy that enforcement remains as fickle as London's weather. Rising from the stone floor, he leans his shoulder against the alcove's damp wall, breathing in the hush of midnight. The city outside hums with distant life, carriage wheels, church bells, and the Thames's ceaseless murmur. Alfie carries the Act's promise against his chest, a solemn talisman reminding him that laws once written can bind masters rather than sons. And though he knows that paper alone cannot cleanse flues or cure betrayal, he clings to the fragile hope that over time those words will shine brighter than any ember in the chimney's dark. News of the Chimney Sweepers Regulation Act arrives at the Dockside Inn on a salt-damp evening, delivered in the form of a single, ragged broadsheet clutched by the barkeep's apprentice. Alfie's mother stands near a corner table, its plank scarred by spilled ale and tobacco burns, where she had been nursing a draught of thin broth. The inn's air is thick with the tang of brine and the sharp scent of coal smoke drifting in from the river. The apprentice crosses the creaking floorboards, each step a muted creak under the weight of damp boots, and thrusts the broadsheet into her hand. The paper is damp at the edges, ink bleeding where sea spray touched the rough sheets. She unfolds it with deliberate slowness, fingering the crisp folds with the same care a mother might give to her child's first pair of shoes. Around her, the dock workers and sailors murmur over their tankards. The inn's lanterns cast a warm glow on faces roughened by salt and sun. A pair of seamen argue over the tide's favouring of their barge. News far loftier than chimney laws, yet somehow their voices soften as they sense her solemn hope. Even the clatter of a dropped crate and the bark of a hound at the door fade into the background. She smooths the broadsheet's centrefold, revealing the headline, Chimney Sweepers Regulation Act passed, under 21's forbidden to climb. The letters, bold and brassy, feel to her like first light breaking over the river's horizon. Her eyes trace the words, memorizing each syllable, as though it were part of a lullaby, promising safer tomorrows. Single tear slips free, pooling at the corner of her eye before tracing a damp path down her soot-streaked cheek. She blinks it away, and allows herself a subtle, rueful smile, an unexpected flutter of humour at the thought that a law written in Westminster could chase away so many tears. The notion feels strangely tender, that ink and paper might guard her small boy better than any blanket. Nearby, the inn's hearth crackles, warming the chill that drapes her shoulders like a second shawl. She presses the broadsheet to her heart, feeling the thin wood table beneath her palm tremble in time with her pulse. In that heartbeat, she imagines Alfie's next dawn. Not the brittle scrape of broom on brick, but the gentle comfort of breakfast warmth. Not the hiss of flue smoke, but the hush of morning light. A sailor at the next table raises his mug in her direction. A silent nod of solidarity. She offers him a grateful glance, the gesture small but significant in the inn's subdued camaraderie. In this crowded room of hardened men, her silent triumph glows like a candle in the dark, fragile, yet resolute. Folding the broadsheet with careful fingers, she tucks it into her apron pocket beside a faded ribbon Alfie once gave her. The ribbon's colour is dulled by soot and time, but it still carries the memory of his small hand pressing it into hers. Together, ribbon and paper form her arsenal against fear, a twin talisman of love and law. Before she rises to leave, she tucks a stray lock of hair behind her ear and inhales the mingled scents of hearth and river. She allows herself one more, deeper smile, tasting hope on her tongue. Outside, the Thames murmurs against the quay, and she knows that even in the heart of London's vastness, a mother's quiet victory can ripple like a stone cast upon still water. With that, she steps into the night's mist, the broadsheet folded and ready, her heart steadied by the promise that her son's next dawn might bring less terror and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance at true freedom. At 14 years old, Alfie Finch traded the soot-laden weight of his chimney brush for the crisp heft of a carpenter's chisel. He arrived on his first morning at Mr. Hawthorne's workshop, a low-slung building set back from the cobbled lane, its wide windows flung open to admit the scent of fresh pine and warm linseed oil. Even before he stepped inside, the air carried the promise of transformation, a promise that called his ears might soften, and that he, once a child of flues, could become an artisan of timber. Mr. Hawthorne greeted him at the threshold, his hands folded over a plane that gleamed like a river of silver. The joiner's apron, pocked with chips of wood and faint streaks of oil, spoke of decades spent coaxing form from raw timber. "Welcome, Alfie," he said in a voice as steady as a well-tuned mallet strike. "Here, we build more than furniture. We shape new beginnings." Alfie nodded, heart fluttering with a mixture of awe and remembrance of flue walls, so narrow they seemed to pinch the world. Inside, the workshop breathed with gentle activity. Shafts of morning light slanted through high windows, illuminating floating sawdust motes that drifted like lazy moths. Along one wall, rows of chisels and gouges hung on a pegboard, tools polished by use, their handles smooth as river stones. On another, upright cabinets held planes of every shape and size, their iron soles whisper-smooth beneath Alfie's fingertips. The scent of pine, sharp and sweet, melded with the faint tang of varnish and the musky undertone of old wood, creating a sensory symphony that felt worlds away from the acrid bite of chimney smoke. Mr. Hawthorne led Alfie to a sturdy workbench scarred by years of planning and carving. "Your first task," he said, setting a rectangular block of oak before him, "is to learn the grain." Alfie ran his palm along the wood's length, feeling the ridges and valleys beneath his calloused fingertips. Each rise of the grain felt like a ridge on a hidden map, guiding him toward clean cuts and smooth curves. He inhaled the wood's earthy aroma, enjoying a momentary thought that he might be discovering a more agreeable companion than soot. The joiner demonstrated the proper way to hold a chisel, thumb tucked along the handle, elbow aligned, wrist firm yet flexible. "Angle matters," Mr. Hawthorne murmured. "Too steep, and you'll splinter. Too shallow and you'll skid." Alfie watched as the blade sliced into the oak, releasing a ribbon of shavings that curled like parchment scrolls. He felt a quiet thrill at that first shaving, so different from the coarse fragments of brick and soot he once coaxed from flues. When his turn came, Alfie gripped the chisel and practiced the joiner's measured strokes. His muscles tensed at first, then learned to yield the right pressure, a balance between force and finesse. The chisel's edge whispered against the wood, leaving a smooth channel that caught the lamplight. Piece by piece, Alfie's block transformed from a raw lump into a gently contoured beam. Each shaving that fell to the bench was a small triumph, gathering at his feet like a silent audience, applauding a timid debut. Mr. Hawthorne moved through the workshop, dispensing quiet praise. "That's it, Alfie. Feel the wood's story," he said, tapping a finger on the freshly planed surface. "Let it guide your hands." Alfie felt a warmth spread through his chest, not the fierce heat of ruined flues, but a gentle glow of purpose. His calloused hands, once instruments of survival, were becoming tools of creation. Across the bench, a half-finished footstool waited. Alfie took up a rasp and began smoothing its edges, the metal teeth singing against wood. He noticed the seat's slight wobble and, with guidance, measured its legs against his chisel handle, correcting length and angle until the stool stood balanced and firm. In that moment he sensed the freedom in precision, that rules, when applied with care, produce steadiness rather than constraint. As the sun dipped low, casting amber light across the workshop's planks, Alfie cleaned his tools and set aside the day's work. His palms bore new impressions. Fine splinters nestled among the old scars, but the ache was different, not the searing pain of asphyxiation or whip, but the gentle exhaustion of honest labour. Mr. Hawthorne nodded, approvingly, as Alfie wiped the last plane blade with a rag. Walking home, Alfie breathed in the evening air, tasting the mingled scents of pine residue and distant coal smoke. He realized that beyond flue and forge lay a horizon shaped by his own hands. The apprenticeship to carpentry had given him more than skill. It had given him a vision of new tomorrows, of shaped wood becoming objects of beauty, and of a boy once bound by soot growing into a young man bound by purpose. And each planed surface, each measured cut, felt like a quiet whisper of freedom carried upon the wood's grain. Each Sunday morning, Alfie walks the few winding streets from the sweep house to the ragged school, the damp chill of dawn clinging to his patched coat. A thin veil of mist drifts through the narrow lanes, and he can feel the faint promise of warmth in the sunbeams that pour through the tall mullioned windows of the schoolroom. The building's stone walls, grey and worn, hold the hush of countless whispered lessons, while the creak of the heavy door announces his arrival like a soft invitation. Inside, the air is thick with chalk dust that drifts in lazy motes through the shafts of light. Each grain floats like a tiny vessel carrying knowledge, and Alfie watches them swirl as he settles onto a rough-hewn bench. The boards beneath him are worn smooth by generations of eager knees, and he feels the echo of countless children who once recited their alphabet in this same spot. A pleasant creak in the floorboards reminds him that he is not the first, nor the last, to seek sanctuary here each Sunday. At the front of the room, the headmaster stands behind a tall wooden dais. His robe is threadbare but clean, and his spectacles perch neatly on the bridge of his nose. He surveys the class with a kindly sternness, as though measuring each student's potential against some invisible scale. When his gaze rests on Alfie, a slight nod of approval warms the boy's chest more than any hearth could. First comes arithmetic. The headmaster writes figures in chalk upon the blackboard. Simple sums at first, 3 pong 5, 7 tons 2, each equation laid out in crisp white lines that cut through the darkness. Alfie rises to the challenge, heart thumping a measured rhythm, and recites the answers with careful precision. 8, 5. His voice, steady and clear, fills the room in long, even notes. Each correct response feels like a small triumph, a step away from the narrow corridors of flues, and a step toward the wider world. Next is grammar. The headmaster traces a sentence on the board. The boy climbs the chimney. Alfie reads it silently, then aloud, savouring the curve of each word. The he pronounces softly, imagining it as a key that unlocks understanding. Boy climbs the chimney. Each syllable tastes foreign and intoxicating, as though he was sipping a sweet syrup that flows through his mind and glitters on his tongue. The other students follow suit, their voices blending into a gentle chorus of earnest learning. Between lessons, the room settles into a hush punctuated only by the scratch of quill on paper and the occasional cough. Alfie leans forward, dipping his quill into inkwells set into the desk, and practicing letters with methodical care. His flourishes are uneven at first, the ink blotting in places, but with each practiced stroke, his hand gains confidence, the letters growing more distinct and sure. Outside, the world continues in its relentless pace, the distant clang of factory whistles, the rumble of carts on cobbles. But here, time behaves differently. It stretches and sighs, measured in lessons learned rather than lashes endured. Alfie breathes in the scent of chalk and candle wax, a delicate perfume compared to the harsh tang of coal dust. When the headmaster passes by Alfie's desk to inspect his work, Alfie feels a flutter of pride, a proud nod, a small pat on the shoulder, gestures so gentle yet carrying the weight of affirmation. He feels buoyed, as though each nod lifts him a fraction above the soot-stained ground. In that moment, the memory of the whip's crack in some distant flue recedes. diminished by the hush of learning and the warmth of approval. As the morning wanes, the headmaster closes the lesson with a soft prayer for wisdom and perseverance. The class bows their heads, and Alfie's thoughts drift to the fold of the primer in his breast pocket and the chisel waiting in Mr. Hawthorne's workshop. Here in this drafty schoolroom he gathers tools invisible yet indispensable, sums, grammar, and a measure of self-belief that no whip could strip away. When the final bell rings, Alfie steps back into the sunlit street, the chalk dust still clinging to his coat like a promise. Each Sunday in the ragged school becomes a lifeline, a gentle reminder that beyond the world of flues and soot lies a horizon shaped by words and numbers, where every lesson learned on a quiet bench brings him closer to new tomorrows. At dawn's first light, Alfie Finch stands on a dew-slick platform, the brass coach ticket pressed against his palm like a small, hard promise. Years of whispered savings, coins slipped from alehouse jars, pennies bartered from bakery scraps, have blossomed into this single token of reinvention. His hair, still dusted with chimney soot, catches the pale beam of morning sun, giving him the look of a boy straining towards something brighter. The coach's polished side glints like a mirror of possibility. Its wheels rest against the rails, silent and patient, as Alfie settles onto the worn wooden seat. The air is cool, brushing against his cheeks with a soft breath that smells of damp earth and distant sea spray. He tucks the ticket into an inner pocket, nestled beside his primer and the printed Act of 1834, a silent trinity of tools guiding him beyond the flue's mouth. As the coach lurches forward, Alfie feels the gentle hum of the engine beneath him, a rhythm more soothing than the staccato of a whip or the clatter of bristles against brick. He leans his forehead against the polished window frame, watching the Thames recede into a ribbon of silver mist. The river's familiar curves slip by, London Bridge vaulting like a stone sentinel, the tower's stern silhouette, the cluster of chimneys that once beckoned him into darkness. With each mile, the skyline's labyrinth of death grows smaller, each smokestack's spire retreating into memory. The countryside unfolds beyond the window's glass, a muted tapestry of thatch and hedgerow framed by early autumn's haze. Fields, chlorophyll green and amber brown, ripple in the soft breeze, and hedgerows woven with brambles blush with the first hints of berry. Alfie breathes deeply, tasting the sweetness of barley and the faint perfume of wild flowers, a contrast to the coal's bitter tang still clinging to his clothes. Inside the coach, fellow travellers stir from dusty slumber. A merchant rubs flour-dusted hands on his waistcoat. A mother cradles a yawning infant. Their murmured conversations drift through the compartment in warm tides of accent and anecdote. Alfie listens, his ears attuned to the world's gentler symphony, the whisper of wheels on rails, the sigh of leather upholstery, the soft rustle of a newspaper turn. He closes his eyes, counting the coach's gentle sway. With each rock he feels the past's weight ease from his shoulders. He recalls Mr. Hawthorne's workshop, sawdust motes dancing in pine-scented beams, and the ragged school's chalk-dusted sunbeams. He imagines the coach's path as a bridge between then and now, each mile a plank laid toward new horizons. Alfie allows himself a private chuckle at the irony. A boy who once scaled smokestacks now drifts northward in crafted comfort. The wooden bench beneath him is firm, but softer than the ledges he once clung to. The window's latch clicks, a sound he likens to a gate opening, and he stretches his legs, flexing calloused toes in borrowed boots that feel strangely like shoes of a different life. As the Thames disappears behind rolling hills, Alfie leans forward to watch the mist ripple across distant streams. He feels a tremor of anticipation, like the first cast of a fishing line into unknown waters. He recalls the smoky alcoves where he learned letters and prayers, the hidden maps drawn under gaslight, the token shawl and pipe shared beneath London Bridge. Now those memories form the ballast that steadies him as he navigates toward a fresh chapter. When the coach slows at Newcastle, Alfie gathers his few possessions: brass ticket, primer, printed act, roll of saved pennies, and steps onto the platform. The air here carries salt from the North Sea, crisp and invigorating. He breathes it in, chest swelling with the knowledge that his next climb will not be into a chimney, but into a life shaped by his own hands. He adjusts the collar of his patched coat, smudged with soot yet shielded by resolve, as he walks toward the city's gates. Alfie offers a quiet nod to the departing coach companion of his rebirth, and sets his gaze on Newcastle's distant rooftops. Beyond them lies an open horizon, a tapestry waiting for his touch, and with each measured step on the sandstone platform, he feels the firm echo of hope beneath his feet, guiding him northbound homeward at last, into his new tomorrow. Years have passed since Alfie Finch first slipped beneath the arches of London Bridge. A soot-streaked boy in patched coat and hopeful heart. Now, decades later, he returns, clean-shaven, shoulders straighter, hands steadier to those same damp stones. The arches feel familiar, their curves as comforting as an old friend's embrace. A gentle wind drifts off the Thames, carrying the scent of riverweed and distant smoke, and Alfie inhales deeply, letting the cool air chase away the fret of years gone by. Under each arch, former chimney sweep boys, now men weathered by time, gather in a loose semicircle. Their once coal-black hair is now a soft silver, their skin lined like well-worn leather. Yet in their eyes glimmers the same spark of defiance that carried them up flues and into better futures. Each man cradles a single chimney brush, its bristles bound in iron, as they were in Alfie's youth. But tonight they serve a different purpose. Beacons of remembrance. At Alfie's nod, they light the ends of their brushes from a solitary lantern's flame. The orange glow ripples across damp stone, turning arches into cathedral vaults of flickering light. Drips of water from mossy ledges catch in the brush's bristles, sizzling softly as they ignite. The scent of burning wood mingles with the ever-present hint of river mist, creating a fragrance both ancient and alive. Silence falls, a deep, respectful hush that hums beneath the arches like distant machinery. Alfie lifts his own brush, its flame steady in his weathered grip, and begins. "Billy Morgan," he intones, voice calm yet resonant. A man to Alfie's left repeats the name. Then another, their voices weaving into a quiet litany. Each name, Peter Dale, Samuel Finch, Thomas Tug Murphy, is claimed from the margins of history, spoken into life one more time. The flames dance in the men's eyes, reflecting memories of narrow ledges and whispered secrets. Alfie watches the brush's glow catch in the laugh lines around an old friend's mouth, a subtle curve that betrays a private smile, perhaps at recalling a shared prank beneath gaslight, or the gentle absurdity of lighting a chimney brush on fire rather than a tobacco pipe. The humour is modest but vital, a reminder that joy and sorrow often walk together through a life. Water drips from the arches, each drop a muted percussion against the stone floor. Alfie notes the rhythm, the steady beat of memory, balancing the crackle of flame and the soft cadence of recited names. He feels the stones beneath his feet, cool, solid, unchanged, and he knows that this gathering is both an echo of the past and a promise for the future. After the names are spoken, Alfie lifts his brush higher, as though offering the flame to the vault of the bridge itself. The men follow suit, their bristles forming a circle of light. He speaks again, this time of gratitude, for survival, for reform, for the laws that once lived only on parchment and now carried real weight. "To the boys we were, and to the futures we forged," he murmurs. The flames burn brighter for a moment, then settle into a gentle glow. The brushes burn low, their bristles charred at the tips, and Alfie allows a small breath of relief. The moment has been honoured. He and his comrades lower their flames, letting them die back into smouldering embers. Each man gently taps his brush on the stone floor, coaxing the last sparks to fall, as though releasing a final sigh of remembrance. When the light has dimmed, and only the lantern remains, the circle breaks. Men clasp one another's shoulders, a silent greeting among brothers, and drift out from beneath the bridge. Alfie lingers for a moment longer, feeling the river's lullaby and the weight of unspoken stories cradled in the arches. He closes his eyes, listening to the echo of footsteps fading away, and carries with him the warmth of each remembered name, flames of the past lighting the path to tomorrow. Alfie steps across the threshold of the modern factory with a sense of careful wonder. Where once his small frame had pressed against brick shafts choked with soot, he now finds himself surrounded by the hum of machinery, smooth rollers turning precisely, conveyor belts gliding with almost inaudible grace. The air is warm, tinged with the scent of pressed cotton and polished steel, rather than the acrid tang of coal. Alfie breathes deep, tasting a quiet triumph in each inhalation. Here, no child toil defines this place, only the measured rhythm of gears and pistons. A guide, a man in crisp overalls rather than a leather apron, leads Alfie through rows of automated looms, He marvels at the dexterity of metal arms weaving fabric with impeccable consistency. He watches as sensors direct the machines to adjust tension, replacing the work that once fell to tiny hands like his own. A faint click punctuates each adjustment, a soft metronome that speaks of efficiency and, more importantly, absence. Absence of children perched on stools, scantily clothed against the draft of flues, wielding brushes heavier than their limbs. At a bench of gleaming stainless steel, Alfie notes a plaque. All operators 8. He allows himself a small, wry smile, subtle observational humour, that rises from memory's depths. The idea that a mere number could stand between youth and danger, where once laws were promises scrawled on pamphlets. The modern factory's panels display real-time safety reports, staff rotations listed on digital screens, emergency exits illuminated by soft green light. Alfie's heart swells with silent pride. These are the fruits of battles fought long ago in hushed parliamentary halls and workhouse corridors. The guide gestures toward a viewing gallery overlooking a bright classroom. Children, no older than 10, sit at individual desks, each with its own lamp and textbooks arrayed like treasures. Their faces are intent, fingers tracing letters and numerals rather than brick mortar or iron weights. The classroom hums with a different energy, the murmur of recitation, the scratch of pencils on paper, the soft directive of a teacher's voice guiding young minds through geography and grammar. Alfie remembers the ragged school's chalk-dusted sunbeams and the cramped attic lessons, and a wave of gratitude washes through him. Gratitude for every reformer who dared legislate change, and for every inspector who, for once, kept his ledger open to truth. He moves among the modern pupils, each glance a study in contrast. Their hands are clean, their clothes belong to childhood rather than indenture. Their eyes reflect curiosity instead of resignation. Alfie's own calloused fingers flex at his side, tools of years defined by soot. He flexes them gently now, imagining them learning to clutch pencils instead of chisels, to shape words instead of soot. The hum of the factory fades into the background, replaced by the steady cadence of lessons conducted with both rigor and care. Alfie steps back into the factory floor and runs a hand along a machine's smooth panel. He recalls the morphological shift from flue to factory, from child labour hidden in shadows, to transparent operations bathed in light. The factories of his youth were silent on a Sunday. These operate 7 days a week, but with schedules that spare neither body nor spirit. The sign above the exit reads simply, "Know your rights," a phrase that once might have felt too grand for a chimney boy to utter. Alfie smiles at the modesty of the law's reminder, a stern yet gentle admonition that vigilance must accompany progress. As he prepares to leave, Alfie surveys the factory one last time. The conveyors hum, the air tastes of fresh possibility, and the children's voices drift through open doors. He feels a quiet pride bloom in his chest, tempered by a lingering awareness that history's tides can ebb as easily as they flow. He thinks of the laws he once read by lantern light, the broadsheets folded with hope in a dockside inn, and the struggles waged in the commons. He knows now that change, once achieved, must be guarded with the same resolve that fueled its inception. Stepping onto the factory's paved yard, Alfie breathes in the cool air, allowing the modern world's rhythm to settle into his bones. The silhouette of London's skyline, trimmed of smoke and soot, spreads before him like a panorama of hard-won freedom. And as he turns to walk back into the city's gentle bustle, he carries with him the quiet conviction that, though laws may bind masters, only collective vigilance can ensure that no child ever again subsists on chimney dust, rather than the promise of dawn. As the ember glow of our story fades into the quiet hush of night, imagine Alfie Finch standing once more beneath the arches of London Bridge. His face, lined by memory yet softened by the years, catches the last flicker of gaslight as he turns back to us, now not as a boy of soot, but as a living testament to promise and perseverance. In that moment, his voice becomes a whisper, tender yet unwavering, carrying across the river's hush and into the valleys of your own mind. "Remember us," he says, each word falling like a soft footstep across a silent chamber. Children of the soot, who rose before dawn and braved the flue's narrow maze. The cadence of his tone is deliberate, measured, as though marking the beating of a heart in slumber. He does not plead, he simply reminds, gentle as a breeze that ruffles the curtain at your window. "Every chimney you light," he continues, "each spark that dances in the darkness, let it shine in our honor. Picture the glow of that spark flickering against brick and night, a silent salute to those who climbed when breath was a precious luxury. You can almost feel the warmth in your chest, steady and mild, as though a single flame burns there to guide you, and every breath of fresh air you take, Alfie murmurs, carries our legacy. He pauses, and for a moment the world beyond seems to hold its breath along with you. In that pause, you sense the contrast, your unhurried inhalations, unhindered by soot, a luxury purchased by the struggle of generations. It is a gift, and he asks you simply to recognize its price. Guard your freedom, he says next, voice softening even further, as fiercely as we once clung to life in the flue's darkness. The words hang in the gentle dark, a tender admonition rather than a warning. There is no harshness here, only the quiet urgency of one who has known chains and found a way to loosen them. Listen to the subtle echo in his tone, an echo that resonates with both pride and vulnerability. In that final hush, you feel the rhythm of his years beneath London's sooty skyline, the thrum of steam engines, the hush of candle-lit lessons, the chorus of children's voices rising above factory whistles. These echoes swirl around Alfie even as darkness gathers, a testament to the bridges built between past and present, flue and freedom. Sleep well, he seems to whisper now, though the words are unspoken. He leaves you with the weightlessness of night, the gentle promise that your dreams can wander spaces once reserved for soot-bound boys who dreamed of dawn. Let your mind drift along his words, each a stepping stone across the silent river of sleep. As you close your eyes, if you have not already, you carry with you the soft imprint of his final plea, the cold flagstones of the garret, the dance of broom against brick, the hush of coal-laden corridors, all recede into memory. In their place, you hold the warmth of his legacy, that every moment of unburdened breath, every ember of aspiration, glows brighter for the echoes of those who came before. And so, as you slip into restful repose, let Alfie's whisper linger at the edges of your mind. Remember us, children of the soot, guard your freedom as fiercely as we once clung to life in darkness. In that gentle admonition, find both solace and strength, and let your dreams carry you onward, into a world shaped by hope, guided by light, and forever anchored by the legacy of those who rose through the flue to dream once more. And so, our 3-hour odyssey through soot-streaked flues and flickering gaslight draws gently to a close. We have crept with Alfie from his straw-chaff garret at dawn, felt the clinging chill of stone floors and tasted the acrid whisper of coal smoke on the morning air. We climbed narrow chimneys with him, where a single misstep meant oblivion, and learned the weight of willow brushes, coiled hemp ropes, and battered scrapers in hands too small to wield them without tremor. We huddled with him under London Bridge's arches, sharing stolen primer pages and psalm books by candlelight, and witnessed his cautious rebellions, clogged stove flues, brush-toss strikes in muddy puddles, and whispered flight plans charted by lamplight. We followed his journey from Dickensian dust to measured chisels in a pine-scented workshop to sunlit ragged schoolrooms where chalk dust danced in motes of possibility. We watched, through broadsheet headlines and a mother's tearful clutch of paper, as law replaced lash and child labour faded like a distant shadow. Each chapter, each scrape of wood, each recited psalm, each ember-lit chimney brush, has been an invitation to lean back, inhale steadily, and let Alfie's steady resolve lull your mind. Here, in the hush of reform's promise and the soft exhale of remembrance, we find not despair but a quiet testament to resilience, a flickering legacy that binds our present breath to theirs. If Alfie's ascent through hardship and hope stirred you, there are more gentle excavations ahead, perhaps a midnight stroll with a Victorian lamplighter, or the hush-toned rituals of a seamstress's dawn. Our channel remains your calm companion for immersive history that soothes even as it enlightens. Rest now. Let the whispers of chimney drafts and distant carriage wheels fade into the rhythm of your breathing. When you're ready for the next voyage, tap into another video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss our next slow, reflective journey. Share in the comments which moment of Alfie's world lingers in your thoughts, and where you're listening from. Thank you for carrying Alfie's story, and the countless echoes of those who climbed before him, into this quiet hour. Sleep well, until our paths cross again beneath the gentle glow of history's lamplight.